GOT. Chapter 41. Jaime the First. Part of him would be glad to leave King's Landing behind, Jaime knew. As of late the city left a sour taste in his mouth. This was the place of his shame, of all his indiscretions. This was the place. Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat. Let him be king of the ashes. It was not an evil act, Jaime knew. He knew. But they had mocked and jeered him all the same, never knowing they all owed him their worthless lives. The time had still come, however, for them to learn the truth. The time had come for Jaime to confess his crimes before the kingdom. There was no other way, the king had said. The list burned a hole in his pocket. No matter. This was his only way back to honor. But still, even as he pondered his own honor, Jaime wanted one last chance to be dishonorable. One last night, Jaime thought as he pushed open the doors to the queen's chambers. He found her stood upright, staring thoughtfully at a wine stain on the wall, shards of shattered glass scattered across the flagstones below. He watched almost awestruck as the dappled light danced across her golden hair. She had set aside her mourning dress by now for a gown of green silk. A ruby as large as a pigeon's head hung from a chain around her neck, nestled between her breasts. Even now, he still found her beyond beautiful. She turned to him as she heard his footsteps. I had hoped by now you would grow tired of that wretched beard, she said, brow furrowed. All that hair makes you look like Robert. Robert's beard was black, Jaime argued, stroking his chin. Mine's gold. Cersei scoffed derisively. Gray, more like. She reached over and pulled a single silver strand from his beard. All the colors drained from you, brother. You've become a pale, pitiful little ghost of yourself. It's all the white, I expect. I prefer you in red and gold. Jaime smiled. I prefer you in nothing at all. He wanted to push her back against the wall and kiss her, have her here and now and roughly. I will make a bargain with you, he said instead. Relieve me of my duties for an hour and I'll give you command of my razor. She licked her lips, her look souring slightly. I command you already, she said. Then command me, Jaime urged, leaning forwards. Up close she smelled strongly of spiced wine and sweat. I'm not in the mood, she snapped suddenly. Jaime glanced again at the wine stain on the wall, the remains of the glass littering the floor below. Why? She paused, looking him up and down. Esser Osni, she mumbled. Was he the cause of her foul temper today? Knights. Tell me, do your wits all leave you when you swear your oaths? Jaime's quirked a lone eyebrow with confusion. What are you talking about? Cersei stiffened, jaw clenching and unclenching. Nothing, she spat dismissively. Now leave me be. I'm in no mood for you. Jaime left Cersei's chambers quietly seething, marching stiffly. But no matter what he told himself, Jaime still pined for his sister. The most beautiful woman in the world. Now was not the time for such thoughts, Jaime chastised himself, not when his duty was calling. He walked to the throne room, and found the king awaiting him on the Iron Throne, flanked by Esser Balon Swan and Esser Loras Tyrell. When will he have to face his shame? Jaime wondered as he gazed at Esser Loras. Everyone knew he was a sword swallower. They had to know. Jaime turned and stood before the court, waiting and watching as all the lords and ladies filed into the gallery. He felt his father's gaze behind him, but determinedly ignored it. Petitioners filed in through the doors and one by one the king heard them. Almost an entire hour passed without incident. And then, finally, it happened. Lord Mathis Rowan entered the court, Tommen's master of works, and after feigning a little fuss, the king waved him through his guard and allowed him to whisper a few hurried words into his ear. The words they shared were irrelevant. This was all staged, a lie. No matter. It would suffice. Esser Jaime Lannister, the king called gravely down to him atop the Iron Throne, waving Lord Rowan away. Please present yourself before the throne. Jaime felt the pit in his stomach deepen as he walked stiffly into the center of the throne room and turned to face his fate. Lord Tywin watched the proceedings with interest from his place of pride on the steps to the Iron Throne. Did he know? Your Grace, Jaime said, kneeling. You are known by many as Kingslayer, Tommen began, and Jaime felt a little pang of impotent anger at the name as he arose to his feet again. But I don't think anyone cared to ask why you broke your oaths and betrayed the Mad King. Your Grace. Jaime pleaded in a moment of practiced weakness, even as he hardened his heart. The truth, Esser Jaime, Tommen insisted, eyes narrowing. Jaime did his best look haunted, gazing out into the middle distance as he began his mummery. The Mad King was obsessed with wildfire before he died, Jaime tentatively said, voice thick with emotion. He used it to roast the flesh off all those he thought his enemies. Murderers and rapists at first, nobody any decent person would object to seeing burned, but as time passed his lusts for the flames grew more and more insatiable. His pet pyromancers were only too eager to serve. His last hand was won, Jaime recalled. Lord Rossart, a burning torch as his sigil. I should have drowned him instead of gutting him. Sir Jaime. Tommen interrupted. Jaime snapped from his rehearsed reverie. Yes, your grace. My apologies. Where was I? Jaime itched the beard on his chin thoughtfully. Ah, yes. The flames. You see, your grace, it wasn't just criminals the Mad King wanted burned near the end. He burned Lord Rickard, of course, and that should have been enough for me to slay him, but I kept my sword buried in its sheath, bound by my oaths. But then he gave the order during the sack of King's Landing, and I just broke. Tommen leaned in, listening with supposedly rapt attention. What command did he give, Sir Jaime? Burn them all, Jaime recited, eyes shut tight in remembrance. I want him dead, the traitor. I want his head, or you'll burn with all the rest. All the traitors. The Mad King asked you to slay your own father. Tommen questioned after a long moment, lone eyebrow raised. I, Jaime said, nodding. But that wasn't what made me turn. There was something else he ordered. And what was that, Sir Jaime? The rest of the court suddenly seemed as enraptured as the king, eager ears awaiting his words. Let Robert be king over charred bones and cooked meat, Jaime chanted. Let him be king of the ashes. The Mad King had ordered his hand to plant wildfire throughout the city, you see. And if the war didn't go his way, he wanted. No, he ordered the city immolated. A hush fell through the throne room. Without even having look, Jaime could tell he was achieving the intended effect. But they didn't quite believe him, not yet. They wouldn't till they saw proof, a proof that would soon be provided. Mercifully, however, Jaime's role in this mummery was soon to end. I did what I did to save this city, he continued in a hoarse voice, almost whispering. It was a choice between my oaths as a knight, and my oaths as a member of the Kingsguard. I chose my knighthood over my white cloak. Tommen nodded. Very well, he said gravely. Your Grace, Jaime interrupted as expected. May I ask, why now? You never. Everybody just assumed. Nobody ever cared to ask that question till today. Because we found some, Tommen said. During some of the works I commissioned to repair the damage done to the city during the siege. After Lord Mathis told me that, it wasn't hard for me to make the connection to the Mad King's obsession with wildfire. I merely wished to confirm my suspicions, or failing that, be made aware what group of people would think to place jars of wildfire beneath my city. Of course, Your Grace, Jaime said, nodding in understanding along with all the watching lords and ladies. Now, Tommen said, I will ask, Sir Jaime, if you have any knowledge of where the Mad King had his hand put the pots. Jaime gulped. The Dragon Pit, the great sept of Baelor, he said to many shocked gasps from the lords. The Red Keep. Tommen blinked as if he was genuinely blindsided. Truly, he trailed off, the court hanging off his every word. Truly the madness of the Targaryens knew no bounds. The Mad King was obsessed with wildfire, Jaime said again. He would have bathed in it if he'd had the balls. That's enough for now, Tommen said, and turned to his master of works. I think, Lord Mathis, that we have a great deal of work ahead of us making this city of ours safe again once Sir Jaime has written us a list. GOT, Chapter 42, Jaime II. That's enough for now, Tommen said, and turned to his master of works. I think, Lord Mathis, that we have a great deal of work ahead of us making this city of ours safe again once Sir Jaime has written us a list. Lord Rowan nodded gravely, brow furrowed with worry. All around, all the lords seemed to share his look of consternation. Still, the ploy had worked. Their opinion of him had increased immeasurably. Even Lord Tywin, stood stern beside the throne, seemed a little shaken if you knew where to look. But now that he had told the truth about what the world thought was his darkest deed, the time had come for him to finally pay the price for his crimes. Sir Jaime Lannister, the king called out, none can deny that in killing the Mad King you did a great service to the realm. A service for which a reward is long overdue. And yet, you also killed your king. You could have knocked him out, had him bound, done a dozen other things, but you slew him instead. This is a crime, no other word for it, a crime for which you have not yet been punished. And so I have decided on your fate, he continued. You will venture forth from King's Landing on the morrow to the Riverlands with a small company of your choosing, and commit yourself to restoring order to that portion of my realm. Once this task is complete, and only then, will you be allowed to choose your own fate. You can continue on the Kingsguard, your honor restored, or you can choose to depart from my service. Jaime bowed his head, respecting the king's decision. Stood beside the throne, his father's eyes seemed to glimmer with something. Hope, perhaps, that his heir was finally coming back home. Jaime continued ignoring him as he wound his way back to his own chambers for the night. He readied all his things, sent his list to Lord Rowan, and sipped his wine balefully in silence, watching the sun crawl below the horizon. Tyrion came and offered his congratulations, and the pair shared japes and tales as the sun went down, and then he up and left the moment night fell, and Jaime was alone again. He had wanted to say something, but by the king's orders he was forced to let the remaining secrets he had sour his soul. Tyrion would never know the truth about his beloved Tysha. The shadow of the city and the glimmer of the sea filled his gaze as Jaime leaned back and sighed. He was only ripped from his reverie in the small hours by another visitor. He turned his head and gazed out at the doorway, and found Cersei stood awaiting him in the door, clad in a slimmer, thinner gown, shimmering red and gold in the candlelight. She walked to him and offered no words, reaching down and pulling his lips to hers. Jaime's passion stiffened in his breeches, and he had his wish after all. One last night. He had her on his table, tearing her gown away and revealing her glory underneath. She wore nothing to slow him, no stockings, no small clothes. His hands wandered all over, her lips, the nape of her neck, her shoulders, her breasts, the curve of her waist, the dimples at the base of her back, her plump ass and the tight little hole hiding in the middle between her buttocks. She spread her legs wide for him, welcoming him into her wetness with a soft moan. After so long without her, Jaime spared her no mercy. He lost himself in her flesh. Oh, Jaime, she moaned as they mated. Yes, yes, yes. Do it now, do me now. Jaime, Jaime, Jaime. Her hand looped around the back his head, pulling him closer, and he silenced her with a kiss, attacking her lips with an unspoken ardor. Yes, she said breathlessly once he broke away. My brother, my sweet brother, just like that. Don't leave me, don't leave me. Jaime slowed slightly even as she nibbled his ear and stroked his hair and kissed a line down his neck. His passion dulled a little between his legs. She's seducing me, he realized as he neared his finish, changing his mind at the last minute as he withdrew from within her and sprayed her belly and breasts with his seed instead. That certainly explains her sudden change in mood, Jaime thought. I don't have a choice, he said after he was done. I am the queen, she said. You are mine to command. And I command you to stay. You must know the king gave his commands before the entire court, Jaime argued. I can hardly ignore him. Then talk to Tommen, she said. He knows about us, he can surely be made to understand. You are my brother, the only one I can trust. Have you spoken to him? Jaime asked. Cersei stiffened and scowled. He's proven nearly as robust in his defiance of me as Joffrey was. And a great deal cleverer too, Jaime thought. Joffrey truly had been a cunt. Then what do you expect me to do? Jaime asked. You're the boy's mother, not me. I'm only his uncle. You of all people should know that Tommen's mind is made up. And father is firmly in favor of his decision, so it's hardly as though I can appeal to him. Cersei scowled again, quiet infuriation furrowing her brow. That boy. Your son, Jaime reminded her. And your king as well. Cersei suddenly stood up from her seat on the tabletop, gathering up her torn gown and dressing herself hurriedly. I must be off, she said stiffly. Stay a little while longer, Jaime pleaded, pulling her closer and pressing a kiss to her chest. Cersei shook her head, gently pushing him away. No, she said. No, the risk is too great. Jaime watched her leave longingly, and then tossed and turned the rest of the night. He awoke bleary-eyed to the harsh rays of the sun shining through the hangings in the early light of the morning. Armor clattered as he dressed himself and gathered his things. Esser Ilyn greeted him silence as he ventured from his room and headed to the place where he would depart. The Tonguelis man would be a valuable tool, now that Bronn was gone. A whetstone against which he could sharpen his skills, a secret keeper for his shame. 40 knights and many guards awaited him outside the Red Keep stables. Half were Westermen sworn to house Lannister, Esser Adam Marbrand at the helm. Esser Dormit stood waiting, ready to carry the king's standard. Jaime observed his group with a keen eye even as he clambered atop his charger. Together, they left the Red Keep and set off into the heart of the city. Looking around, Jaime could see the king's orders at work. Men gingerly lifted aged pots of wildfire out from the ground, new holes already dug under the buildings, and carried them slowly to carts filled with beach sand. From there they would be taken, somewhere. Presumably to the Guildhall of the Alchemists to be destroyed, but with Tommen there was no telling. What do his dreams tell him to do? Jaime wondered. Lining the edges of the streets he rode, crowds of well-wishers were arrayed to wish him farewell. Tommen's trick may have worked perhaps a little too well, Jaime thought as he ignored them and rode on down the thoroughfare to the gates. My lord, one man asked from beside him, will you wave your golden hand and give the small folk a tale to tell their children? I don't have a hand, Jaime bit out. I have a hook. There were others as well, arrayed beyond the gates. The royal crowd of well-wishers stood at the edge of the wood, the king standing strong at the helm, his remaining kingsguards looming over him. There was Lord Tywin, Tyrion, much of the small council, and finally Lady Brienne. Jaime sighed and cursed under his breath and slowed his horse with his reins. He had hoped for a clean break from this place, but it appeared that his torment was not yet done. He stopped his steed and clambered back down to the ground, and had to endure a whole lot of eager handshaking and well-wishing from the lords, before finally he got to Lady Brienne. This is my squire, she said, nudging a girl that rose just above her waist, dark of hair and gray of eye. Arya. Lyra. Jaime offered her a stiff, uncertain nod even as she glanced up at him with murder in her gaze, and then he turned back to face Lady Brienne. She suits you, he said awkwardly. Lady Brienne nodded. As does all this gallantry and gold suit you, my lord. Jaime stared at her, the usual squirrel's nest of hair brushed neatly back, her armor polished to a shine. He felt the sudden urge to lean in and kiss her. It suits you finely enough as well, wench, he said instead with the ghost of a smile. Brienne snorted and let out a breath of laughter in better humor than Jaime would have expected from her. Something about her had changed, Jaime thought, but it seemed for the better. She was smarter, less stubborn. Impulsively, Jaime pulled her in and pressed a peck to her forehead before he moved on, watching amusedly out of the corner of his eyes as she blushed a bright red. The king dismissed her, and after offering Jaime one last parting look she left with her squire in tow. After some consideration, I'm thinking of republishing this fanfic. The webnovel algorithm hasn't been very kind, and a friend advised me to try reposting while releasing chapters simultaneously. I believe this could be worth trying, so I'm giving it some thought. GOT. Chapter 43, Oathkeeper. She was smarter, less stubborn. Impulsively, Jaime pulled her in and pressed a peck to her forehead before he moved on, watching amusedly out of the corner of his eyes as she blushed a bright red. The king dismissed her, and after offering Jaime one last parting look she left with her squire in tow. Now, only Tyrion and Tywin and Tommen awaited him, and two members of the Kingsguard he was supposed to command. Brother. Tyrion began. Off to play the peacemaker, are you? Jaime lifted his hook. Thought I'd try my hand at it, he japed. Tyrion's mismatched eyes gleamed with mischief. Oh, he said, I'm sure the Riverlords will be thrilled to have you riding to their rescue. Jaime shrugged, a smile tugging on his lips. I've faced worse in my time, he said. I'll be back before you know it. Well, Tyrion replied with a wry smile, just try not to lose any more limbs on the way. Jaime snorted. I'll try my best, little brother. Next was Lord Tywin. Jaime, he said severely, eyes hard. I'm glad to see you have some sense. Lannisters are no fools, Jaime reminded him sourly. I haven't forgotten who I am. Yes, Tywin said simply, gaze gleaming with a quiet satisfaction after having finally gotten his way. And finally, Tommen stood patiently awaiting him. Your Grace, Jaime greeted him. Just Tommen for today, I think, he said, looking around. Come with me, uncle. I have some things I wish to tell you away from prying eyes and ears. Jaime followed his king deeper into the wood, around a thicket of trees so that all the rest of the men fell out of sight. It looked like one of the Kingsguard might have wanted to protest, but a stern glare from the king struck Sir Loras dumb again. When they were finally free of any onlookers, Tommen launched at him with a tight hug. I'm going to miss you, uncle, he said into his breastplate. Jaime awkwardly patted his son's back with a gauntleted hand. I'll miss you too. Tommen pulled away, eyes sharp again, and reached down into his belt and withdrew some crumpled letters from under his coat. What are these? Jaime asked as he took them. Insurance, Tommen said. The Riverlands is a dangerous place, uncle. Those there contain various orders that should enable you to do as I bid without too much obstruction from the Riverlanders or their Riverlords. Don't open them now, you can do that later. And finally, I have reason to believe that Lady Catelyn is not as deceased as she seems, but lives on as a vengeful wraith of her former self. Jaime quirked a disbelieving eyebrow. Is this a bad jape? He asked, but Tommen's face did not turn. Jaime paled. Tommen's dreams haven't been wrong yet, he reflected with horror. No, uncle, it is not, Tommen replied grimly. That last letter was written by Arya Stark. That one with my seal on the top. In the event you wind up in the Lady Catelyn's undead custody, I want you to show her that. It might just stay her hand from lopping off your head. With it I have also packaged something else. Orders to slay all the Freys involved with the Red Wedding. That should help your case a little more as well. Jaime nodded hesitantly. Tommen smiled. Do not fret, uncle. And remember, though regular steel may not slay such a wraith, Valyrian steel will still do the trick. May I see your sword? Jaime withdrew the unnamed blade. Valyrian steel shaded a morbid blend of smoky gray and scab-colored crimson. Tommen took the blade into his own hands and inspected it with the dappled light shining through the leaves. Did you give it a name? He asked. Not yet, Jaime said, shaking his head. Tommen nodded his head, eyes transfixed to the metal. Well, then you'll allow me to name it instead. Jaime shrugged again as Tommen looked over the sword. As you please. Men say you broke your oaths when you slew the Mad King, Tommen began grandly. I disagree. I say you broke your oaths when, like last night, you bedded your own sister, your own queen. This steel had an honorable owner, once. Of course the king had known. Of course. His dreams must have told him. Jaime looked down in shame. He had no excuses to offer. It deserves an honorable owner once again, Tommen continued. You'll break your oaths no longer, uncle, and I think your sword should reflect this fact. Jaime looked at the blade the king held in his hands. Oathkeeper will be the name, Tommen declared as he offered him the hilt. For the blade and its bearer both. Jaime nodded sharply as he accepted the newly dubbed sword. Oathkeeper. A barren pav. For a baron, the port of Sunspear was a sight for sore eyes. The journey south had been meandering, and thrice now unfavorable winds had slowed their way. With every passing day Ellaria grew more impatient to see her daughters, and a baron to see his brother. And yet, there was naught he could do to allay their boredom. A baron stayed mostly in his cabin, welcoming the occasional sailor to their bed, several nights spent in the nude, grunts and squeals and groans the only sound as even Ellaria's seemingly endless lusts were exhausted. And yet, regardless of what he tried, thoughts of murder still ran through his mind with every league. A spy. No matter. Today was not the day for such suspicions, and a baron felt a grin grow in the middle of his face as they drew nearer and nearer to the dock. Obara, Elia and little Abella stood arrayed at the end of the quay, awaiting their victorious father on the prow of the Elia as it sailed ashore. Doria and Loreza, presumably, would greet him either in the old palace or in the water gardens. Obara, of course, had on her full plate, bronze glittering in the sunlight, leather straps for various swords and daggers crisscrossing her skin, her whip hanging off her hip in a loose loop. She had made an effort to look her best for him, he could tell. Her rat-brown nest of hair was uncharacteristically well-combed, her clothing almost womanly. A savage grin graced her face, however, much like a baron's own. Elia, on the other hand, seemed better put together. Her long black braid trailed down her bare shoulder, her dress orange, held aloft by a ring of gold around her neck. Still, she was smiling, and a baron could see in the distance the outline of a dagger on her thigh when the wind blew her dress hither and thither. Beside her was the littler Abella, her dress of a similar cut, a more mischievous smile on her face. Her black hair shimmered in the sunlight and fell around her slim shoulders in straight lines, unbound and untamed, but still well cared for. When finally the ship was still, bobbing gently in the water as one of the sailors threw a rope out to tie it to the quay, the gangplank was lowered and a baron could go to see his daughters, Ellaria at his side. She swept little Abella up in a warm hug, even as a baron embraced the other two, and once all words were spoken they finally set off together into the streets of the Shadow City, guards flanking them as they reached the end of the quay. All around, the city was silent in anticipation. The Spear and Sun towers loomed in the distance. Crowds of well-wishers lined the streets, backs against mud-brick walls the color of dun, and broke out in raucous cheering at his arrival. Whores leaned out from brothel windows, clad in naught but jewels and oil, teats sweating and swaying and glistening in the golden sun as they watched him pass. Today they'd service any man and refuse any coin in honor of the mountain's demise at his hand. A baron smiled and waved as he walked past the rows of loyal Dornishmen on his way to the walls of the Sunspear. Our prince is here, they cried. Victory for the Viper. Compared to Tirosh or Mur or even King's Landing, the Shadow City was merely a town. And yet it was the nearest thing to a true city that Dorne had. The air smelled of dust, sweat and smoke, and the babble of voices could be heard at all hours. In the center was the seat of House Martell, the Sandship and the Spear and Sun towers, flanked on three sides by the sea, And on the fourth side mud-bricked hovels and shops and pillow houses had sprung up, some with walls of their own. More hovels had arisen behind those walls, and so on and so on. And so when they finally reached the gates, the cheering of the crowds still loud behind them, they were quickly welcomed inside. They went through the threefold gate, heading along the straight brick path, bypassing the winding web of alleys and narrow passages the walls made, and went into the old palace. Only once they had passed the thick walls of the castle did the shouts slip away, and when they reached the outer ward they found Sir Manfrey waiting to greet him. Beside him half the court was arrayed, the blind old seneschal Ricasso, young Maester Miles, and a dozen knights. Prince Oberyn, Sir Manfrey greeted him. Sunspear rejoices at your return. I heard, Oberyn said, grinning. I have commanded the cooks to prepare a feast for this evening, he continued, with all your favorites. I can hardly wait. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. Numera. Download app now. GOT. Chapter 44. Oberyn I have commanded the cooks to prepare a feast for this evening, he continued, with all your favorites. I can hardly wait. When they finally got away Oberyn was firstly led to his chambers, where he bathed, a task he involved Ellaria in, and by the time they were done a servant called them down to dinner. At the table, Oberyn's family were all arrayed, along with the feast. Every type of food, lavishly prepared, served on golden platters and plates. Sir Manfrey sat at the foot of the table, gesturing for Oberyn to take the head. Ellaria sat herself beside that seat, Abella beside her, Obara and Elia sat opposite. A wonderful feast. Oberyn declared, grinning. But lacking in decoration, I think. He reached down into a sack he'd brought with him from his chambers, and withdrew from within a large skull, meat boiled off the bones, and set it down in the center of the table. Compliments of the king, he said as he finally sat. The trail, Elia said, eyes gleaming. Tell us about the trial. Oberyn chuckled and nodded and complied. He told the tale of his duel with the mountain that rides in detail, and all his family listened with rapt attention. He told them of the king's gift, which he then withdrew from its sheath at his hip and presented to the table, still red with the mountain's blood, and then of what a close shave that victory truly was. He described each blow and cut. His three daughters all listened intently, faces showing at times excitement and at others fear. Little Abella in particular seemed most excitable, and made a show spearing her meat as she imagined her father had speared the mountain. The king. Obara leaned over and quietly asked once he was done. Not the usurper. Oberyn nodded as he dug into a cut of beef. You heard how he helped me, he said. My quarrel is no longer with the crown. And the old lion. The old lion's end will come, Oberyn answered between bites. We just have to be patient. Obara frowned, confused. Patience, father. Has defeating the mountain sated your desire for revenge? No, Oberyn thought, the king's agents did that. A serving girl rounded the table, clad in a dress of jewels and precious little else, and poured him a glass of Dornish red, batting her lashes and bending over perhaps a little more than necessary to grant Oberyn a better view of her bosom. Are you one of his? Oberyn wondered as he took a sip and sent her on with a slim smile, her hips swaying enticingly as she sauntered away. I was able to slay the mountain because of circumstance, Oberyn said. Killing Lord Tywin is an entirely different sort of task, at least if we wish to get away with it. The king is cleverer than he looks, and more dangerous as well. An ILL thought plan could well get us all killed. Or start a war, Obara added. Or start a war, Oberyn agreed. I need to see Doran. He's still in the water gardens, Obara said. He ordered Princess Myrcella and Trystane back to the water gardens after Arianne left, though he himself has not left in what feels like an age. I can't imagine he'll leave anytime soon, and I'd ask you stay a while longer. Still, if the matter is urgent then we can leave on the morrow. It very much is, Oberyn said, nodding. The feast went on for a few hours more, and Oberyn only went to his bed once it was late, Ellaria and the serving girl moaning and screaming his name into the early hours as they took turns on his cock. Despite this, he awoke at sunrise and readied his things for the next leg of the journey, Ellaria opting to remain a little while longer in Sunspear with her two eldest daughters. When they set off, it was Obara and Oberyn with dozen Dornish guardsmen that Oberyn felt he could no longer truly trust. He watched their backs with a keen eye as his sand steed carried him forwards. He was safe, most likely the king would not order him killed, but he misliked it nonetheless. Most likely these are loyal men, Oberyn thought as he rode on in silence. Most likely. The road to the water gardens ran beside the sea, so he had a nice breeze to soothe his suspicions as he rode. Only after an hour of silence did Obara draw her steed beside his and venture to say, "Father, I would know what troubles you so." Oberon shot more suspicious glances at the guards around them. "Not here," he hissed. "When we are more alone." Obara frowned as she followed his gaze to the guards. "This matter is so private even our most loyal men cannot hear it." "Of course not," he said. "But who's to say who's loyal and who's not?" Obara's expression changed in realization at his words, her grip on her horse's reins tightening as she glanced about. "You talk of a turncoat?" she asked in a low voice. "I told you the king was clever." Obara stiffened. "And dangerous as well, so you said," she said, nodding. And onwards they rode in silence, suspicions filling the air, blown across by a gentle sea breeze. Only 3 leagues of coast road separated the water gardens and Sunspear, and yet they were akin to different worlds. The citrus scents of lemons and blood oranges wafted over to them, a sharp contrast to the dust and sweat they'd left behind. The water gardens themselves were a shock of pale pink marble and luscious green and a gentle blue in the pools. In those same pools Oberon could hear the children laughing and playing and splashing as he dismounted his horse and set off at a fast march through the halls of the water gardens, guards all around him bowing their heads as he passed. Obara was close behind, the drumbeat of her boots on the marble floor never too far away. Oberon clambered up the steps to Doran's terrace, and was confronted at the end of the hall by Hoda. "Captain," Oberon acknowledged, even as suspicion again sparked in his mind. "What better man than him?" he thought. "With Hoda the king would have a look into even my brother's most private moments." Areo gestured onto the terrace. "The prince awaits you." With a nod Oberon ventured onto the terrace, Obara grumbling behind him as Hoda barred her entry. "The prince is watching the children at their play. He is never to be disturbed when he is watching them at their play." And play the children did. Below, Oberon could see them all, the youngest no less than 5, the oldest no more than 10. Half were boys and half were girls. He could hear them splashing and shouting at each other, their voices shrill and sharp and playful. They waged mock war in those pools, wading in waist-deep water and trying to force each other below the surface, throwing up huge splashes of water that flew over the sides of the pool. Out in the distance Oberon could see some of the older boys swimming in the sea. A row of girls sat on the beach, watching the boys whilst they built tall sandcastles. The citrus scent came in strong up here, and fat, ripened blood oranges occasionally fell from the branches of their trees and burst on the pale marble floors, splattering their sweet juices all over. Beneath the shade of one tree, conveniently plucked clean of all falling fruit, was Tristane with his new wife, like ivory and ebony. They sat opposite each other at a stone table, a Sivas board between them. "No," Oberon thought as he watched her share a smile with her husband, "she surely cannot be the spy." GOT. Chapter 45, Oberon 2. Beneath the shade of one tree, conveniently plucked clean of all falling fruit, was Tristane with his new wife, like ivory and ebony. They sat opposite each other at a stone table, a Sivas board between them. "No," Oberon thought as he watched her share a smile with her husband, "she surely cannot be the spy." Doran watched all this with his shrewd, sunken eyes. He was sat in his rolling chair with his gouty legs propped up, a fine Myrish blanket thrown over his lap to hide his swollen joints and limbs, wrapped in bandages soaked in soothing lotions. Maester Caliot knelt beside his prince, tending to one last matter, his head as smooth and round as an egg. He was so fat it was hard to tell his age, though Oberon knew he had once served his own mother. And yet, in spite his age, at Doran's command he was quite nimble, and fled the terrace meekly. "I suppose congratulations are in order," Doran began as Oberon found a seat for himself, eyes still affixed to the children below. "Your victory over the mountain was very well received in Sunspear, or so I am told." "Oh, brother," Oberon boasted, "it was glorious. You should have seen it. All the lords of the realm arrayed, the king watching closely, the mountain's massive sword sweeping overhead. The spectacle of the century. And all the better that Lord Tywin lost his favorite tool and had no choice but to sit and watch. I took the mountain's skull as well, brother, but I decided to leave that in Sunspear." Doran turned laboriously in his chair to look at him, and Oberon noted how much older he seemed than his age. His hair was graying fast, his body soft and shapeless beneath his robes, his legs noticeably swollen, his knees lumps under his blanket. His eyes were tired, and yet also alight, hard with a quiet fury. "I note Ariane is not with you," he finally said. "I left her in King's Landing," Oberon answered. "To sit the small council in my stead." You left my heir with the Lannisters, Doran said quietly, and a Baron resisted the urge to wince and rear back at his brother's softly spoken words. She needs to learn, a Baron explained. Viserys is dead, and if she is to be the heir to Sunspear, then she will need to learn more about the rest of the realms. And with Arianne's lust for excitement, I thought King's Landing might suit her well. You left my heir with the Lannisters, Doran repeated. They won't hurt her, a Baron insisted. Not now we have Myrcella. A silence fell over the two of them as they watched Myrcella play against Trystane. Her golden hair cascaded down her pale shoulders, over her crimson gown. Her full lips were slightly parted, emerald eyes narrowed in concentration as she gazed at the jade pieces on the board. They looked like night and day, the two of them together. Trystane with his olive skin and straight black hair, Myrcella with her milky complexion and mop of curls. One was 5 and 10, the other 4 and 10, and both were at just the age where when they caught each other's eyes they'd break out into blushes and look away shyly. She bled for the first time a little while after you left, Doran said. It'll only be a matter of time before the two are abed. We can't hurt her, not now that she has become one of us. And so an empty threat protects my Arianne in that pit of snakes people call a city. The king does not seem to think so, a Baron said, glancing around to ensure they were alone. He took care to tell me as such before I left. Made some veiled, and some not so veiled, threats to try and keep us in line, to ward us away from his sister and his grandfather. Even went as far as to tell me something he couldn't possibly know. What was that? Doran asked, curious. Viserys, a Baron said. Arianne and Viserys. He knew. Mentioned it in casual conversation, as though he were not discussing a grave treason. And then the king had the gall to offer his forgiveness and tell me it was all forgotten, so long as such plots were not continued and his precious princess was kept safe. Doran sighed and licked his lips. We have a turncoat, he concluded. A Baron nodded in agreement. My thoughts as well, he said. It must be someone significant, and someone close to us, else the king would not know such things. Did the king give any indication anyone else knew? Doran asked. Does he have some new master of whispers? Does Lord Tywin know as well? A Baron shook his head. Not so far as I could tell. Doran watched Myrcella more closely at her seat below the orange tree in silence. She sends letters to her brother often, he noted offhandedly. I presumed it was how he knew of Arianne's plot to have her crowned, and yet. Doran sighed. I wonder if she knows who among us belongs to her brother. Perhaps, a Baron remarked. Regardless, only a handful of people knew our true intent. It should not be too hard to sift through them and find the culprit. Doran rubbed his chin contemplatively, the fire fading slightly in his sunken eyes. If he knows that, then. What else does he know? What of Quentyn? I can only presume, a Baron said. Yet if he knew about Viserys, then it does seem likely. And so another of my children is at the Boy King's mercy, Doran said. Quentyn is already across the narrow sea, with Sir Jairus Drinkwater and Sir William Wells and Sirs Cletus and Archibald Euronwood. He is already too far gone. I cannot call him back now, nor send someone after him who could reach him in time. Perhaps Essos is outside the king's reach. A Baron ventured. Perhaps, Doran agreed. Yet regardless you are right, the king is indeed cleverer than he seems. He means to secure himself by simply telling us just enough to fill us with uncertainty and doubt, to disrupt our work. The mere idea of his men in Dorne is enough to stay my hand, enough to discourage me away from thoughts of open treason. It matters little whether Daenerys Targaryen has dragons if the king can just order all our throats cut at a moment's notice, never mind that he holds my daughter hostage. With one conversation he has destroyed years of planning. So what now? A Baron asked. The mountain is dead, but Lord Tywin is not. And justice for Elia cannot be had so long so the old lion lives. A Baron's question was met with silence. Doran stared out onto the pools of the water gardens, but a Baron noted his eyes were mostly affixed to his last remaining son. He and his new wife were sneaking a kiss, thinking themselves alone with all eyes watching the water battle. You went above and beyond what I asked of you, Doran finally said, his eyes gleaming. I'd call it foolish, except you were fortunate enough to succeed. Can you imagine the uproar if you'd been killed? But now, the boy king on the Iron Throne has again changed the game, and we are forced to adapt. But one thing is for certain, now that the stakes have risen again, there can be no more room made for risk. Don't worry, a Baron said. I told Nymeria and Tyene to be careful. They'll do little more than ingratiate themselves and acquire influence and information, and perhaps even undermine his new regime just a tad. To test the true extent of Tommen's strength. They know to await our orders before they act. Let us pray they listen, then, Doran said wanly. Lest the boy king sees exactly what kind of an ally he has in Sunspear. GOT. Chapter 46. Davos I. Davos Pav. Even in the gloom of the wolf's den, Davos could tell something had gone awry. He had come to White Harbor an envoy of his king, but they held him captive. His cell was large and luxuriously furnished, twice the size of his cabin on his ship, and with a hearth and even a proper privy in the corner, and yet guards patrolled outside his doors day and night, ever vigilant against escape attempts. He pressed his ear against the wood of the door every morning, only to hear shuffling of feet and the odd whispered word, and then silence till a tray of porridge was pushed through the slot in the door. But not that morning. There were no feet, no words warped by wood, just silence. The usual hour for his morning meal came and went without notice, and Davos's nerves had begun to fray. All the days in the wolf's den were much the same, and any changes were usually for the worse. Davos still remembered Wyman's parting words to him. I have heard enough treason for one day. You would have me risk my city for a false king and a false god. You would have me sacrifice my only living son to Stannis Baratheon's fool stubbornness. No. I will not do it. Not for you. Not for your lord. Not for your god. I answer to the seven as well as Stannis, Davos had replied. Wyman had seemed disinterested, Davos recalled. Do you? Very well, then. You came into my city a smuggler, a spy, a peddler of lies and treasons. I should tear out your tongue with hot pincers and deliver you to the Dreadfort. But if the mother can be merciful, then so can I. The king, the true king, will decide your fate. And since that day, Davos's whole world had been his cell in the wolf's den. Every night Davos went to sleep with those words in his head, dreading the day the raven would come and his fate would be decided. It would not be a good end, Davos was willing to bet. Cersei and Lord Tywin were a great many things, but merciful was not the word that came to mind when he thought of them. And Tommen supposedly sweet, little Tommen might be willing to offer him clemency, but at what cost? He'd have to forswear his king, no doubt, betray the man who gave him everything. Davos hardened his resolve. No, he decided. No matter what, I will stay true to Stannis. I will not plead for mercy, either. I will die a knight. It was a moot point, anyhow. Such a young king would not possess that kind of power. But then, after so much waiting on that morning that his gut was beginning to growl, Davos finally heard the shuffling of feet. He rose and paced his cell as he awaited something. Much to his surprise, however, the door did not swing open, and a gang of guards did not storm his cell. Instead, the slot in his door slid open again, another tray pushed through, this time laden with freshly caught fish and bread still warm from the oven, spiced mutton, boiled crab, and a medley of vegetables ranging from turnips to carrots instead of the usual dungeon fare of gruel and stale bread and rotting meat. This treatment persisted for a while following that first morning. When he asked for furs to keep him warm, he got them. When he asked for a book to keep him entertained whilst he sat on his own, he got a copy of the Seven-Pointed Star. He got wood for his hearth, clean clothing, a candle, a bottle of ink, a roll of parchment, and even a quill that he used to scratch out some small letters, a stack building in the corner over the course of his confinement. I was a better smuggler than a knight, he wrote to his wife, a better knight than a lord, a better lord than a hand, and a better hand than a husband. I'm sorry, Maria. I should have been there, should have loved you whilst I still had the chance. Please forgive my wrongs. Should Stannis lose this war, our lands will be lost. Take our children and flee to Bravos. If Stannis should win, then I expect our sons will have a place at court, and a fosterage for the lot of them under lords high and low till they can all earn their knighthoods. Davos shuffled through the rest of the letters awkwardly. The ones to his youngest sons were stiff and awkward, for in truth he knew them not nearly as well as the older ones, the ones who drowned and burned at the Blackwater. Davos screwed his eyes shut and shook his head with guilt. A man should have more to say to his sons than just that. He dipped his quill again in the ink and after a moment's hesitation wrote, I did not do so ill. I rose from flea bottom to become a king's hand, and I learned to read and write, but I lost my luck when I lost my finger bones. But the one thing I never lost was my love for you all. Davos stared at the lackluster letters again, still dissatisfied. He felt no more words coming to mind, however, and so pushed the stack into the corner and stared at them mournfully from across his cell as he did most days, awaiting his morning meal. It was another silent dawn, stretching on so long his gut again began to growl. What now? Davos wondered. Last time he had seen luxury, but as his stomach twisted tighter and tighter in anticipation with every passing second he suspected the same could not be said of today. He was still staring at the letters when suddenly, the rattling of metal on metal and then the clanking and clicking of a key turning in a lock could be heard. Davos seized up in surprise, then swept up his letters in his arms and held them close to his heart as the door slowly swung open. The man who stepped through the door was not one of jailers. A fine longsword hung from his hip, a crimson cloak on his shoulders, his build tall and lanky, his thin-seamed face haggard and tired. Lord Seaworth, he said. We haven't much time. Please, come with me. Davos frowned as he stood, still clutching the letters. The please confused him. Men due to be punished were rarely afforded such courtesies. Then again, prisoners such as himself were rarely afforded the courtesy of such a large cell or such luxurious meals. Who are you? He asked. Glover, he said. Robert Glover. The Glover's seat was Deepwood Motte, if he remembered correctly, currently under Ironborn control, and Robert had fought at Duskendale against the Lannisters. Davos braced himself as he rose to his feet and took a chance. If I should die today, I beseech you to see that my letters are delivered, he asked on faith alone. Robert nodded, accepted the letters and said, You have my word, but if you die, it will not be at Glover hands, nor Lord Wyman's. And with that, the pair set off into the hall, winding their way through a darkened flight of steps and out of the wolf's den straight into the godswood, which they crept through slowly and quietly. Red leaves littered the snowy ground. A tangle of white roots and a web of branches passed underfoot and overhead. They went past a rusted old gate at the other end, stopping only to light a torch, and then down into a cellar with seawater sloshing around their feet. They passed through several cellars, in fact, and rows of small cells much darker than the one Davos had. Then there was a blank stone wall that turned when Robert pushed it, beyond which was a narrow passage and yet more steps. Where are we? Davos asked. A secret way up to the new castle, Robert answered. It would not do for you to be seen, my lord. After yet more walking and climbing, so much that Davos's feet began to ache and his legs burn, they finally emerged into a snug solar, richly furnished and cozy. And in the center of the room was sat Wyman Manderley, the enormous lord of White Harbor. Please, sit, Lord Wyman said, gesturing with an arm that jiggled as he moved it. Are you hungry? Pangs ate at Davos's stomach, yet he shook his head. No, my lord. There is wine, if you thirst, he said. My king commanded me to treat with you, not to drink, Davos said defiantly. Wyman sighed and leaned back in his seat. Well enough, he said. I have treated you terribly, I know. I don't expect you to like me. I had my reasons, but, well, I don't expect you should care about that. Davos shook his head. If it will help you find your loyalties, I will listen. GOT. Chapter 47. Davos 2. Davos Pav. Wyman sighed and leaned back in his seat. Well enough, he said. I have treated you terribly, I know. I don't expect you to like me. I had my reasons, but, well, I don't expect you should care about that. Davos shook his head. If it will help you find your loyalties, I will listen. Wyman let a breath of laughter out through his nose, his belly quivering as he shook his head. The Lannisters have my son, he said. Wyllis, my eldest, my only, and my heir. That rancor I showed you earlier at court was a ruse to please our Frey friends. I, like a great many other northern lords, have no love for this new regime. And yet, I will not see my son slain by stubbornness. Wyman smiled again and sipped his wine. Davos watched in silence. When treating with liars, even an honest man must lie. I dare not defy King's Landing so long as they have my son. Tywin Lannister wrote to me himself to say as much. To say that if I did not bend the knee, swear my city, repent my treason and declare my loyalty, my son would die and my line would be reduced to another song such as the Rhynes of Castamer. Davos nodded, still silent. I am fat, and so many think me weak and foolish. Perhaps Lord Tywin is one of these men, perhaps not. I sent him a raven saying I would bend the knee and swear my loyalty only after my son is returned. Soon after the phrase came, carrying Wendell's bones, to make peace and seal it with a marriage pact, or so they claimed, though I would sooner trust a Lannister than a Frey. I was not going to give them what they wanted till I had Wyllis, safe and sound, and they were not going to give me Wyllis till I proved my loyalty. Your arrival was convenient, in this sense. I see, Davos said. I hope so, Wyman said. You have sons of your own, or so I hear. 3, Davos said. Though I fathered 7. I had 2, Wyman said. But my son Wendell went to the twins a guest. He ate Lord Walder's bread and salt, hung his sword up on the wall, and they slit his throat and murdered him. Murdered, I say, no matter what Frey fables you might hear. Lord Wyman's hand clenched into a fist. I drink and jape with them, but never for a second have I forgotten. The North remembers, Lord Davos. The North remembers. Something about the way Lord Wyman spoke sent a shiver up Davos's spine. King Stannis can give you justice. Your loyalty does you credit, my lord, Wyman said, but Stannis cannot be my king. They watch me day and night, they do, their noses twitching at so much as a whiff of treachery. They have bought some of my knights, and one of their wives' handmaids has found her way into my fool's bed. If Stannis wonders why my letters say so little, it is because I cannot trust my maester. He was born a Lannister of Lannisport, you see, and though maesters are supposed to give up their old loyalties when they don their chains, I cannot forget his blood. False friends and foes fill my court, Lord Davos. They riddle my city like roaches. If the risk is so great, Davos asked, then why am I here? Wyman nodded, and produced from beneath his doublet a crumpled scrap of parchment. Not so long ago, I received a letter from the boy king on the Iron Throne. A very curious thing, I think you will find, this letter. One that leads me to believe that the situation within King's Landing has changed considerably. But before we come to that subject, we must first speak on Winterfell. Do you know what transpired there? It was captured by Theon Greyjoy, Davos said, eyeing the letter. Was his fate in there? He had Stark's 2 young sons put to death and their heads mounted on the walls before putting the entire castle to the sword when the Northmen came to oust him. Eventually, I hear he was slain by Bolton's bastard. Not slain, Wyman said, captured and carried back to the Dreefort. The bastard has been flaying him. The tale you have heard is a lie. It was the Bolton bastard who put Winterfell to the sword. Ramsay Snow. He didn't kill them all, however. He spared the women and the girls, tied them together, and then marched them off to the Dreadfort for his sport. Davos felt his gut clench with sickening dread. His sport. He hunts them, Wyman simply said. He strips them naked and sets them loose in the woods. Then he goes after them with horns and hooves and hounds. From time to time some wenches escape and live to tell the tale. Most are less fortunate. When Ramsay reaches them he rapes them, and if they were not good enough sport he has his men rape them too, and sometimes his hounds and horses as well, and then when they are all done he flays the girls and feeds the mangled remains to his dogs. He brings the skins back as trophies. Davos paled, his stomach roiled, the lingering traces of rumbling hunger gone from his gut. Gods be good. How? If ever there was an evil man, Wyman said, shaking his head. Ramsay took Lord Hornwood's lands by raping his widow, then locked her in a tower and let her starve. The Boltons have always seemed more beasts than men, more cruel than cunning, but this one is something special. The Freys are not much better. They speak of skin changers and wargs and tell me it was Lord Robb who slew my Wendell. The sheer gall. Roose Bolton lies about his part in the Red Wedding, just as the Freys do, and his bastard lies about Winterfell. And so long as they have Wylis I have no choice but to accept it. So what now, my lord? Davos asked. Wyman brandished the letter again. And so we come to the boy king and the situation in the capital. When I received this letter it seemed innocent enough, just simple instructions to have you sent down to the capital, alive and unharmed for questioning. I wondered why he had used so much parchment, and chalked it down at first to his childish script. But there was a message hidden in the parchment. Invisible ink, revealed by the heat of a flame. In this hidden message he professes his own hatred for the Boltons and the Freys with much neater words. He speaks the truth about Winterfell, about the Bolton bastards' true nature and about the Red Wedding. I wondered for a while why Ramsay had not been legitimized despite Roose's requests, and now I know. He plans, like I do, the downfall of the Freys and the Boltons for their betrayal, and promises the release and safe return of Wylis's assurance of his intent the moment you arrive in King's Landing. Davos frowned. He means to slay the Freys and Boltons even as they swear fealty to him. It is not so strange, Wyman said. Would you trust a lord whose loyalty is so lacking? And all he needs do is nothing. Those south of the Neck must know that most northern lords have no lost love for the Boltons. He must know that the perceived lack of Lannister support alone will be enough to ruin Roose and sow the seeds for rebellion. Yet there's more in the message as well, speaking of the survival of the younger sons of Eddard Stark. Davos stiffened. You mean to say that the bastard king wants to seat the Starks back in Winterfell? I believe so, Wyman said. And if my suspicions prove correct, then I am prepared. I have been building warships for more than a year, and many are hidden up the White Knife. Even with all my losses, I have more heavy horse than any other lord north of the Neck. My walls are strong, my vaults full of silver. Old Castle and Widow's Watch and Ramsgate all take their commands from me, not from the Boltons. I can deliver all the lords east of the knife to any king I please. Davos nodded in realization. Yet you have a price. Wyman nodded and clapped his hands, and Robert returned with a boy held tight by the shoulder. A Stark. Davos thought at first, but when he caught sight of him he knew it was not so. He was too tall, too big, almost 14 or 15 by the look of him. Who are you? Davos asked. An Ironborn mute, Wyman answered in his place. Wex. He was at Winterfell when Bolton's bastard came. Survived by climbing a heart tree and staying hidden among the branches till they left. He dared not descend, till one day he heard voices below him. There were 6, so Wex says, and 2 were Ned Stark's murdered sons. How can you know if the boy is mute? Davos asked. And as he is an Ironborn, how do you know he doesn't lie? I can know by chalk, he said. He drew them when he arrived, 2 boys and 2 wolves. We can never know the full truth, of course, not till he learns how to write, but Wex is good with his drawings, and the likeness is too close to be coincidence or falsehood. Anyhow, the 6 did not linger long, and as they split up Wex went east after one group. He knows where one of the Stark boys is, Davis concluded. And evidently, so does the boy king, said Lord Wyman as he waved Wex and Robert away. He makes many promises in his letter, but I know better than to trust a Lannister spawn on his word alone. I want to know what he knows, and how. I want to know what he wants, and why. And you, Lord Seaworth, are perfectly placed to find out for me. Davos gulped. They'll kill me, he wanted to say. I serve Stannis, not you, he said instead. Wyman cocked his head, his many chins quivering. Even honest men must lie when dealing with liars, he said again. For now I must serve the boy king on the Iron Throne. In the future, who knows where the winds of fate will blow and the will of the gods will go. And, if it helps, there was more in the letter as well, speaking of a greater threat to the far north, beyond the wall. He even claims to be willing to make peace with King Stannis if it will help him face this supposed enemy. Davos clenched his teeth and then unclenched them. The prospect of peace piqued his interest, he could not deny. But it would be a delicate thing, difficult to accomplish and dependent on 100 conditions. Davos was no wordsmith. Yet what other choice was there? From the wolf's den to the pit of snakes, he sighed. And then back again and onwards, Wyman assured him. I'll give you a proper ship, and a crew. You will leave in chains, of course I cannot be seen to be defying a command from the boy king, but when you are safely at sea and after you have docked at the capital and sent me my whispers from court, the ship will be yours, alongside her crew, to do with as you please. And if I refuse? Wyman smiled. If you will not go into the pit of snakes by ship, then you will go by the stranger's embrace. Got. Chapter 48, Sansa I. Sansa Pav. Bronze Yon knows me, Sansa insisted. He was there, in King's Landing, at the Hands tourney. He saw me in the crowds. Ah, Petter said, nodding as he put a finger under her chin and grazed her lip with his thumb. But back then you were only a pretty face in the crowd. A man fighting in a tourney has far more to concern himself with. And your hair was red then, not black. My daughter is tall and fair, as Sansa was, but her hair is black, and that will be enough. Men only see what they want to see, Elaine. Sansa swallowed as Petter's eyes locked on hers, and then she looked away. The memory of their kiss in the snow still lingered in her mind. The kiss that had killed Lady Lisa. Have a servant prepare the solar, he said as he pulled back. I will receive our lord's declarant there, not in the high hall, lest they think I mean to take the seat of the Arryns. A man as low as me should not be seen to have such lofty ambitions. So you will give them Robert? Sansa asked, though she knew better. And the veil? Petter asked, amused. They already have the veil, Sansa said. They have much of it, I'll grant, but not all. I still have friends in a few places. The Graftons, Linderley, Lionel Corbray, and then all the lords around my own seat in the fingers. Nothing to match the might of the lord's declarant, of course, but enough to give me leverage. But we needn't stay here and suffer the risk, Sansa said. You still have Harrenhal. A seat surrounded on all sides by armies of the crown, far too large and lying in ruins. It'd cost a fortune just to light a fire in every hearth, and that's without even mentioning the curse. I'd put no stock in such things, of course, but I cannot deny there is something ill about that place. Harrenhal has withered every hand to touch it. Petter shook his head. I needed a great title to marry Lisa, Elaine, to bring her back into the fold. And now she is gone. My claim could be too easily challenged. Then give it back to Cersei, Sansa said. And let us pray the curse is real. Petter laughed and teased her with a little smile as his knuckles brushed her cheek. There is something to that, he said. Yet you mustn't fret, Elaine. Cersei's time will come. In this great game we all play, even the littlest pieces have a will of their own. Sometimes they'll refuse to make the moves you plan for them. It is a lesson Cersei has yet to learn, one she refuses to learn. You must remember never to make that mistake, Elaine. Sansa nodded solemnly. I will. Good, Petter said. Now, unless I am mistaken, we both have duties to attend to. Sansa nodded and straightened her dress, and the two of them set off in separate directions. She set upon the food, seeing to it that the wine was mulled and appropriately spiced, and gave commands to the cook to make enough bread and cuts of beef for 20. She saw to the salt as well, making sure it was only of the finest quality. Once they have taken our bread and our salt they become our guests and cannot hurt us, Sansa told herself. Had Robb thought the same, she wondered, on that night where the Freys betrayed all their oaths and cut their throats. Yet Jon Royce was no Frey. She remembered him from the Hand's tourney, resplendent in his bronze plate, brave and valiant and even chivalrous in his victory against the Red Priest Thoros of Myr. No, Sansa tried to convince herself, he would never stoop so low. Once Sansa had made all the necessary preparations, lighting the hearths in the solar and laying out the table, she went to bathe and wash her hair. Then, once this was done, she went and looked over her choices of clothing. There were several gowns that gave her pause and made her heart flutter, yet a bastard such as she supposedly was would not presume to wear such fine silks and furs, no matter how pretty they would have looked on her. She was no longer Sansa, but instead Elaine. And so she went for a dark brown lambswool dress with a simple cut. It was modest and becoming, showing only the tiniest hints of her smooth skin with silken embroidery on the fluttering sleeves and tight bodice, yet it was only a touch finer than what a favored serving girl might wear. It would work well enough as the dress of a base-born daughter of a minor lord. She forewent much in the way of jewels as well, choosing only a simple gold-threaded choker with a silver clasp that wrapped tight around her neck and blended well with her darker hair and distracted from the tully blue of her eyes. I hardly know myself, Sansa thought, perhaps with a touch of melancholy that she quickly quashed. Lord Royce will never recognize me, and that is all that matters. Emboldened by her new dress, a still somewhat nervous Sansa Elaine went down to greet their guests. In Westeros, the Eyrie was the only castle whose main entrance sat below the dungeons. Steep stone steps took guests most of the way, but nearest to the Eyrie the ascent went entirely vertical, and all visitors had the choice of a straight climb up 600 feet of wall littered with handholds, or else an ascent in an old wooden basket at the end of a chain, fit only to haul supplies. Lord Redfort and Lady Waynwood opted for the basket, by far the oldest of the Lords Declarant, and then it was lowered down for fat Lord Belmore. The rest seemed happy to make the climb, and over the course of hours more lords and knights entered the Eyrie than even Sansa had thought fit to prepare for. There were 50 of them, all armed to the teeth. She knew not their names nor their faces, but their heraldry she had made a point of learning. She greeted each lord and knight after the grueling climb in the Crescent Chamber in Lord Robert's name and served them cups of wine. Last of all came the Royces, Lord Nestor and Bronze Jon. Yet though Jon's hair was grey and his face seamed with wrinkles and cracks, he looked about with shrewd eyes, his hands ready at his sides, large and strong enough to rip any man in twain. That face, that plate, it brought the memories all rushing back. She saw him supping at their table in Winterfell, saw him smashing her father to the ground with a practiced sword in hand, and then turning to see to Esser Roderick as well. He will know me, Sansa suddenly knew, in the pit of her stomach. She considered throwing herself at his feet and begging for protection, but thought better of it. He never fought for Robb. Why should he fight for me? The war is finished and Winterfell has fallen. And yet, as she approached, she noted how closely Lord Jon's gaze followed her. She presented him with a cup of wine, her head bowed, and timidly said, Lord Royce, will you take this cup of wine, to take the cold away? Jon's brows, the bushiest she had ever seen, furrowed over his slate-gray eyes. He cocked his head to the side as he studied her face, and a tense silence seemed to fall over all the other lords as they watched him. Then he nodded and accepted the cup, and silence fell away again to chatter as he took his first sip and asked, I know you from somewhere, girl. Might I ask your name? Elaine, Sansa nervously supplied. I'm Lord Petter's natural-born daughter. And I don't think we've ever met, my lord. How old are you, child? Lady Waynwood interjected, the crow's feet around her aged eyes crinkling gently. 14, my lady, Sansa said. A maiden flowered now. But not deflowered, one can hope, Lord Hunter said, his bushy mustache bristling as he spoke. Even as Lord Yon and Lady Anya shared a meaningful look. Hush, now. Lady Wainwood said with a scowl. This girl is young and gently bred, and has suffered horrors enough. Best take us quick to your father, Elaine. The sooner we are done with this the better we will be. GOT, Chapter 49, Sansa 2. Sansa Pav. Hush, now. Lady Wainwood said with a scowl. This girl is young and gently bred, and has suffered horrors enough. Best take us quick to your father, Elaine. The sooner we are done with this the better we will be. Sansa turned and released a quiet sigh of relief as she fled Lord Yon's lingering gaze. The Lord Protector awaits you in the solar, my lords. And together they left the Crescent Chamber, climbing up a flight of steps that left some of the older lords huffing and puffing. Once they had arrived, the guardsmen opened a portcullis that allowed Sansa to lead the men deeper into the eyrie, round several corners and then through a passage lined with royal tapestries. At the end of passage was the door to the solar, and as she approached the guards opened it for them. Petter was sat on the inside at the end of a long table, sipping from a glass of wine and looking intently over some piece of creased parchment. He swiftly abandoned this activity as the Lord Declarant filed in and each began claiming their seats. The lords all sat beside each other, save Lord Nestor who dithered for a second and then chose a seat one away from Petter, halfway between his fellow lords Declarant and the Lord Protector. The knights all stood at the edges of the room, leaning against the walls as they watched, helms hiding many of their unfamiliar faces. My lords, be welcome, Petter said as he studied the crowd, the slightest trace of a frown gracing his features before it was gone again, replaced with a calmer, more placid face. The ascent is wearisome, I know. So I will not waste any more of your precious time. I have been reading this remarkable declaration of yours. Splendid. Whatever Maester wrote it must surely have a way with words that eludes me. I only wish you had also invited me to sign. That seemed throw them. You? Asked Lord Belmore, still puffing. Sign. Certainly, Petter said, leaving the lords and knights at a loss for words. No one loves Lord Robert nearly as well as I do. And so all these false friends and conniving counselors that this declaration speaks of must be rooted out. Bronze Yon broke the silence. We do not mean to bandy words with you, Baelish, he said. Nor did we come for your signature. Petter's placid smile soured slightly. As you wish, he said. But if we will not bandy then we will be blunt. What would you have me do, my lords and lady? The crown has made you Lord of Harrenhal, Simon Templeton said. That seems sufficient for any man. Lord Redfort nodded his agreement. The Riverlands have need of a lord, he said. The Tullys remain besieged at Riverrun, Bracken and Blackwood batter each other in all but open war, Frey fingers creep across the land, and all the same brigands and murderers and thieves run unchecked. Unlike here, I should think your presence and influence there would be welcomed. A possibility, to be sure, yet I have pressing duties here, Petter answered. And then there is Lord Robert to consider. He is so sickly I do not think he would survive the journey. His lordship will remain in the Vale, Yon declared. He will go to Runestone with me, and learn how to fight under the best swords the Vale has. We will make of him a knight that even John Arryn would have been proud of. Petter nodded and tapped the table with the tips of his fingers. Why Runestone? He asked after a second, his tone hinting at doubts. Why not Redfort or Longbow Hall? He will visit each in time, Lord Belmore said, his eyes narrowing to show just a hint of anger. Anya Wainwood sighed. Petter, you must think twice if you mean to turn us against one another. Runestone meets all our requirements, and we are all in agreement about its suitability as the location of Lord Robert's fosterage. There he will meet many a boy his age, certainly more suitable companions for him than the old ladies and sellswords he has at present. The need for company I do not disagree with, Petter said. Yet I hardly think one could call my Elaine an old woman. Lord Robert loves her dearly. You can ask him of that yourself, if you should choose. And, as it happens, I have asked Lords Grafton and Linderley to send me a son each, both Robert's age, to serve in this capacity. I think Robert should have an older boy with him as well, to set an example, Petter said with a glint in his eye. I hear you have such a boy at Ironoaks, Lady Wainwood. Harold Harding. Perhaps you might agree to send him. Enough, Lord Yon said, and the table fell silent. Lord Robert should befriend Harold, and he will do so, at Runestone. Aye, Lord Belmore agreed. Give us the boy and we'll let you leave the Vale for Harrenhal unmolested. Petter gave an exaggerated frown and shot Lord Belmore a reproachful look. Are you suggesting elsewise I might come to harm, my lord? I cannot think why. My late lady wife seemed to think this was my proper seat. You mean the wife that you saw fit to murder? Lord Yon said. Sansa felt panic seize her throat, and her skin turned pale as the blood drained from her face. One of the knights shot her a knowing look, and when Sansa saw him she did her best to hide her shock. Perhaps I should just confess, she thought, wringing her hands in her lap. Yet what can I say? I have already lied to Lord Nestor. Petter was right. They will think me complicit. Petter's eyes flashed with confusion. Now, whatever would bring you to say that, my lord? He asked innocently, acting hurt, though Sansa knew he was really playing for time whilst his mind toiled furiously to come up with a plan. Lisa Tully was the widow of John Arryn, Lady Waynwood began, and the mother of his child. No more. She ruled only as regent. You, let us be frank, you are no Arryn, and Lord Robert is no blood of yours. By what right do you mean to rule us? By what right do you mean to accuse me of murdering my wife? Petter asked, his tone rich with an incisive anger. And if I recall correctly, Lady Lisa named me Lord Protector, not Lord Royce here. An awfully convenient occurrence, wouldn't you say? Lady Waynwood retorted. We all know how Lady Lisa's mind was damaged by so many stillbirths. I can't imagine it would have been too difficult for a man as capable as you to convince her. Simon Templeton cleared his throat loudly, and said, each of us has 1,000 men at the foot of this mountain, Littlefinger. Why, are you threatening me with war? Petter asked in a flat, unimpressed tone. We shall have Lord Robert, Bronze Yon insisted, in a tone that brooked no argument. Petter rose suddenly from his seat and slapped the table so hard that the resulting sound made many of the lords jump in their seats. By what right? He hissed. You come here, to the home of my dead wife, and demand from me my beloved stepson, and slander me before my daughter. You right of defending Lord Robert even as you deny him food. You claim I killed Lisa Arryn, yet you offer no proof of the crime. Petter shook his head in feigned fury. No, my lords, this has gone too far. I am no warrior, but I will fight you if you do not end this siege. There are other lords in the Vale besides yourself, and the crown will support me if needed. If it is war you want, my lords, you must say so now, and I will make the Vale bleed. A war we can win well enough, Bronze Yon simply said, unaffected by Petter's threats. And as for proof, we will have the testimony of the singer Marillion. Petter stopped himself just he was about to launch his reply, turned to look at Lord Yon, and then began laughing. His sour look became a smile again. You mean the word of that scoundrel? He said. Very well, then. If you will come to the area and lay such accusations before me, then instead of a war one will demand a trial. Not just before you, my lords and lady, but before all the rest of the lords of the Vale as well. He thinks to humiliate Lord Yon, Sansa realized. Lady Waynwood nodded and looked around the table to a chorus of eyes and other expressions of assent. I think we can all agree to that, Lord Baelish. She turned back to Petter, quirked an eyebrow and smiled. Oh, but there is one other thing we mustn't forget to mention, my lord. Oh, Petter said, eyes sharpening with surprise. Pray tell, what is it? You say you can count on the crown, Lord Yon continued for Lady Anya, but I wouldn't be so certain of that. He then lifted a large hand in Elaine's direction, leaving his statement shrouded in uncertainty, and extended a calloused finger to point. And so long as she is here, my lord, Marillion's word hardly matters. Because that girl is not your baseborn daughter, Lord Baelish, and Elaine is not her name. She, as you well know, is Sansa Stark. Got. Chapter 50, John I. John Pav. Can I have his boots? Someone asked, as Janos Slint's head went rolling across the muddy ground. They're proper boots, they are, almost new. Lined with fur too. John glanced back at Stannis, and their eyes briefly met. Beside him, he heard the sound of the man taking his refusal to address the question as assent, and soon after the rest of the men descended on the body like a murder of crows, stripping the headless corpse of all but a coarse layer of rosespun. Stannis's gaze flicked over to the crowd, and then after a long moment he turned, shot John an approving nod, and disappeared again inside his tower. John braced himself as he turned away from the scene of the execution and made for his tower. Black brothers parted as he approached, nervously leaving him a path. The boots of his guards tromped in the mud behind him. He had killed Janos Slint for refusing orders, for refusing to serve the wall and refusing to man Greegard despite receiving direct orders, but to them death was death. The man was an oathbreaker, John wanted to say to the lingering looks and watching eyes. A deserter in all but name. No man is more dangerous. No man is more deserving of death. And yet, John kept his peace, even as he met the cold gaze of Alliser Thorne in the crowd, ever defiant. I am the Lord Commander now, Jon said with his eyes. This would not be his last beheading. And Janos Slint was not worthy of his guilt anyhow. He would have to kill better men in the days and weeks and months to come. It was best to spare his remorse for them. As it was, executions always induced a bout of melancholy in Jon, some more pronounced than others. He who passes the sentence should swing the sword, he remembered his father had said as he climbed the steps. A good way to earn the deference of men if done well, and a good way to earn their disdain elsewise. Jon dismissed his guards with a lazy wave of his hand as he arrived in his solar. Today was more an autumn day than a winter one. The snows did not fall, and the curly blanket of clouds did not sit atop the sky. The air was cold, but that was all. Jon pushed open the shutters as he pulled himself a seat and poured himself a cup of wine. This would likely be one of the last days of true light the wall would be lucky to receive in a good long while. He would relish that while he could, before his whole world would be plunged into overcast darkness and bitter chills. From his window, Jon watched the wall. The sunlight bounced off the icy construction of the wall, little teardrops of water rolling down the sides, sparkling like diamonds. He'd seen the wall from up close, when it was unimaginably vast and so tall as to make one feel like a gnat, but he preferred it like this. It was still massive, but from a distance one could better appreciate the awful beauty of it. Jon sighed, sipped the last dregs of wine from his cup, lit the fire in his hearth to ward away the cold even as he left the shutters open to the breeze and sat down to work at his desk. Yet not 1 minute into his work he was interrupted when Sam came in cautiously at first, peeking to see if Mormont's raven was still about to peck at his fingers, and then more confidently once he realized he was safe and pressed a letter onto the table. Another from the Iron Throne. Jon guessed, knowing Sam would not make the trek himself unless it was important. Samwell nodded and sat himself down, even as he pushed the letter across the surface of the table for Jon to read. With the crook of his finger, Jon pulled off the seal and unfurled the scrap of parchment. He read it once, then twice, then swallowed and asked, "Can you keep a secret, Sam?" Sam's eyes narrowed with concern, and he nodded tentatively, almost nervously. "Of course I can, my lord." "It's Arya," Jon said, still looking at the letter, running his thumb over the ink, over the parchment, tears pricking his eyes. "She wrote this letter." Samwell frowned. "Are you certain? It's not a forgery?" "I'd know her hand anywhere," Jon said. "I helped her with her letters, when she was struggling with Maester Luwin's lessons. I've seen it 1,000 times, and I'm seeing it again today." Sam frowned. So King Tommen was telling the truth. "Apparently," Jon said, his look souring again. "But we can't turn our backs on Stannis," Samwell said. Jon shook his head in agreement. "Then you need to destroy that letter, my lord," Samwell said, a warning tone in his voice. "I know you might want to keep it, but if one of Stannis's men finds it. If they find out that the Lord Commander has a sister held under the thumb of the Iron Throne." Sam shook his head. "And it won't just be them either. The other Black brothers will start having doubts as well." "I know," Jon said hotly. "And I'm not under anyone's thumb. I do only what is right for the Watch. But I won't destroy it. Just not. Not right now. Give me a day or two." Samwell nodded and rose to his feet. "I'll leave you be, my lord," he said, his brow still furrowed in concern for his friend as he turned and left. Jon sat in silence for what felt like hours after that, reading and rereading till the words were burned into his mind and the letters began to blur together. He watched the flames slowly die in his hearth and become embers, and when he went to sleep he awoke to wolf dreams again. He was on his haunches in Winterfell's great hall, howling for his pack. Howling and howling, his voice echoing off the cold stone walls. The only light was moonlight, falling in harsh lines on the flagstone floors through the windows. No matter. As Jon's nose twitched, the scents pushed him onwards, guiding him, his padded feet soundless. Ahead was warmth, a fire, a good meal, and his family. Robb would be there with an easy smile, a sword in his hand and an offer to spar. Bran would be there, his legs still working, ever curious, ever climbing. Rickon would be there as well, small and happy and unacquainted with the horrors of this world. So would Sansa, ever prim and proper, and Arya, ever wild and free. And so too would he find the warm embrace of his father. Yet so far, all he had was silence. In his deepest heart, he knew it to all be a dream. Yet the tiniest sliver of hope refused to die. At the end of this hall he would find his family. Jon advanced further, his fear slipping away, replaced with a surging desperation. A slow walk became a jog, and then a run. Yet the hall did not end. It grew and grew, the ceiling rising, the floor widening, the end somehow further away than when he started. He heard a voice, young and girlish, calling out at first, and then screaming. He knew not the words the voice said, but he recognized it to be begging. Jon pushed himself even faster, sprinting now, the wind whipping through his fur, making for the screams before they were silenced. A terrible panic seized him as the voice grew weaker, and the stench of fear filled his nostrils. His muscles burned. Suddenly, he saw it. A naked girl lying flat on her back. Shivering, whimpering, blood leaking out onto the floor from between her legs, her entrails visible through a slit in her stomach. Her face was hidden by a cloak of shadows. A woman was hunched over top, her back turned, her head covered by a hood, silent, slow, dangerous. She turned, and Jon saw eyes of murky blue like a sky shrouded by icy clouds, set into a shredded face of rotten flesh, a halo of stringy white hair spilling out from under the hood. Blood stained her fingertips and lips and spattered her tattered cloak. A white, Jon thought at first, but was soon frozen in fear as he saw the look in its eyes. Or something worse. And then he started awake, his chest heaving. Arya. Ygritte. Sansa. He asked himself. Perhaps, yet I didn't get a good look at the girl. I was too distracted by the woman. Not that that much mattered. Normally during his wolf dreams the halls he visited were empty. Normally all he found was silence, no matter how much he wished otherwise. But today. Jon sighed, shook away what last vestiges of sleep still lingered, and pulled himself from his bed. The morning chill struck his skin and caused an outbreak of reddened gooseflesh. Across the room, the letter caught his eye. Jon thought back to his dreams, grit his teeth, and snatched up the scrap of parchment. He looked it over one last time, eyeing the ink, memorizing the words, and then flicked the letter into the dying embers still glowing in the hearth from the fire he had started yesterday. It caught a light quickly enough, and Jon watched it burn in solemn silence as he dressed himself. You're not the only thing that will burn today, Jon thought as he watched the edges of the parchment crinkle and curl and slowly blacken as wisps of smoke trailed up. Despite his best efforts to convince him to the contrary, today was the day that Stannis had determined as the most auspicious for the king beyond the wall to die. And the Red Witch left no doubts in Jon's mind as to how the execution would be conducted. Shooting one last forlorn look at his hearth, Jon wrapped his fur cloak tight about himself and left his chambers, descending down the steps to find his guards waiting at the bottom, neatly falling in behind him as he trudged through a fresh layer of snow. The day may have been warm and cloudless, but the night had been bitter and heavy. The evidence of that was all around, a thin sheet of white covering every exposed surface. Through the snow Jon walked, and through the snow Jon rode, all the way to the foot of the wall. They brought forth the king beyond the wall with his hands bound beyond his back and a noose hanging loosely off his neck. He had been stripped clean, left only a small hemp shirt that left his arms and legs exposed to the cold as he was led to the wooden scaffold raised over the fire pit. Behind him, Jon saw the wall was still weeping, albeit slower than the day before. The winter chill would set the remaining rivulets of icy water in place soon enough. I tried, Jon wanted to say as he watched Mance stumble. But, alas, all his claims and attempts at convincement of Mance's usefulness had fallen on deaf ears. The law remained plain and simple, a deserter's life was forfeit. And so long as this was true, Stannis's famously iron will would not be shaken. Beside the prisoner, Jon watched as the Red Witch made her presence known. We all must choose, she proclaimed, in a surprisingly loud voice. We must choose between light or dark. Between good or evil. Between the true God or the false one. Mance listened to the rest of Melisandre's speech with a smile on his face, his courage unfailing, but when he turned and saw the woodwork his bravery faltered. It was a cage that hung from the scaffold, made from the twisted and gnarled branches of a weirwood tree all woven together. He balked for a brief moment, and then turned away and recoiled at the sight of the cage, his features marked with horror. Got. Chapter 51, Jon 2. Mance listened to the rest of Melisandre's speech with a smile on his face, his courage unfailing, but when he turned and saw the woodwork his bravery faltered. It was a cage that hung from the scaffold, made from the twisted and gnarled branches of a weirwood tree all woven together. He balked for a brief moment, and then turned away and recoiled at the sight of the cage, his features marked with horror. No, he said, shaking his head and trying to back away. This is not right. I'm not a king, they made me. His words were cut off when two men grabbed him by the armpits and hauled him forwards towards the frame. Mercy! He cried. Mercy! One of Stannis's men pulled on the noose around his neck and choked off his next words, and silently the men holding him tried to stuff him into the cage. They had to beat him to overcome his resistance when he tried to stop himself, and before long the snow on the ground was speckled with blood. With some of his limbs broken, Mance Rayder was half-dragged and half-carried to the cage, and unceremoniously thrown in. The door shut, a dozen of Stannis's men made short work of gathering around the rope and heaving, the scaffold shaking from their efforts as the cage was lifted off the ground above the pit, which was filled with wooden leaves and kindling. Lady Melisandre watched him rise with icy eyes, not a hint of guilt in her entire body. You could have beheaded him, Jon wanted to say, but instead he bit his tongue to keep the peace. Free folk, she called out. Here hangs your kings of lies. Your coward king. She waved her hand and two men came forwards carrying something. And here is the horn he promised would bring down the wall. A lie, Jon thought, or at least that was what Tommen had told him. Jon remembered Ygritte had agreed before she died, telling him that Mance had never managed to find the true horn. Looking at it, Jon saw black wood banded with old gold engraved with runes, 8 feet long from end to end. Whatever it was, Jon knew better than to abandon his caution. He'd keep an eye open either way. Through the stockades, 1,000 captive wildling men watched as the horn was hefted high, and then unceremoniously thrown into the pile of kindling below the cage from which Mance still hung. The horn of darkness, I call it, Melisandre continued. For if the wall falls, then the long night that never ends will surely come as well. And then we will all freeze. No, the Lord of Light cannot let this happen. And so he has gifted us Azor Ahai reborn. Melisandre gestured to Stannis, clad in pale gray plate, his sunken eyes stern and unyielding rather than unfeeling. You can surely still put a stop to this, Jon thought, but knew it would not be so. Free folk. Melisandre cried again. Behold the fate of those who choose the darkness. And just like that, the horn of Joramun burst into flames, and the fire slowly grew to the surrounding kindling. It was a queer fire, green and yellow and purple and red, leaping and spitting and crackling as it slowly grew hot. The stockades shook as some grew angry at seeing their hopes aflame. Inside his cage, despite his broken limbs and bloodied body, Mance screamed incoherently as he clawed first at the noose around his neck and then at the cage with bound hands. He screamed of treachery and witchery, and then he screamed denial after denial after denial. And then he stopped. For a moment Jon thought his heart had burst, but just as he was about to send a silent prayer of thanks to the old gods, a crazed laughter began emanating from the cage, becoming louder and louder as the fire underneath crackled and grew. Jon watched unblinking as the fire caught the weirwood, forcing himself not to react. A display of squeamishness now would be seen as weakness, something he could ill afford. Instead he affixed his eyes and watched, his stomach slowly roiling as burning wood became burning flesh. All around him, 200 black brothers watched with Jon, hoods pulled over their heads to hide who they really were. Greybeards and green boys would not strike fear into the wildlings, and if they were not sufficiently afraid, then Jon knew that all they would do once south of the wall was wreak havoc. As the horn split in the pit with an almighty crack, Mance clutched at the bars of his cage and did a little dance, lifting one foot away from the flames, and then the other, and then back again. But he could delay the inevitable only for so long, and his laughs became screams again, so loud and raw that Jon feared he would tear his throat and fall silent before he died instead of after. Jon could not watch any longer. Now, he hissed, and 3 brothers in the crowd set down their spears, strung their bows, and launched 3 headless arrows into the heart of the cage. Fluttering and jumping, the cage swinging, Mance was no easy target, but the arrows found their mark nonetheless. One took him in the chest, the other in the neck, and the last in the eye. The shafts caught fire in the heat fast enough, but at least the man in the cage was dead. He slid down to the bottom of his cage, the screams silenced as his body was slowly engulfed in fire. The wood of the cage soon began crumbling, but by then all evidence of their deed would be burned away. Stannis was scowling, but Jon did not meet his gaze. Mance Rayder had once been a brother of the Night's Watch. For all he had gone on to do afterwards, he was still a black brother, and that much alone entitled him to a decent death. He who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Free folk. Melisandre started, meeting Jon's eyes for an instant before she turned to the crowd. Your false gods cannot help you. Your false horn is burned. Your false king brought you only death, despair, defeat, yet here stands your one true king. Behold his glory. A false king in more ways than one, Jon thought as he watched the fire. Stannis Baratheon drew Lightbringer. The blade radiated with light, shifting between red, yellow and white. The colors of the ritual flame, shining as though a second sun. When Stannis raised the blade above his head, men had to avert their eyes for the light was too bright. The still raging blaze of the execution fire seemed to shy away, dimming and diminishing before the light of Stannis's sword. The rivulets rolling down the sides of the wall seemed to glow in the distance, suddenly sparkling as they had the day before. Is this the power of King's blood? Jon asked himself. Or is this the power of the Red Witch's tricks? Tommen had been frustratingly vague about that in his letters thus far. It was clear to Jon that suspicion laced every word and caution lined every statement. He wrote in riddles, and rarely revealed anything of substance save warnings and instructions to burn after reading. Yet if what he said was true and that was still no sure thing, then there was a chance that this man had not been Mance at all. Yet how could Tommen know the Red Witch's plans? Jon asked himself. He can hardly see into our minds. So if that Mance was a mummer's trick, then how could he know? Regardless, it was another reason to keep one eye open. Westeros has only one king, Stannis said calmly, though his voice carried across the entire way as he eyed the 1,000 wildlings behind their stockades. With this sword I defend my subjects and destroy those who might menace them. Bend the knee and I promise you food, land and safety. The Watch's food and the Watch's land, Jon thought sourly. Kneel and live, Stannis continued, or go and die. The choice is yours. He slipped his sword back into its scabbard, and the world was dark again. This would be the test. If it was successful, then perhaps peace was possible. If not, then Jon would have to find another way. Stannis's men went to open up the gates to the stockades, ripping up the stakes from the frozen ground. Jon played his part, raising his hand and lowering it, silently instructing his men to part and form a path. Come, Melisandre urged, like a mother speaking to a small child. Come to the light, or else run to the dark. If you choose life, come to me. And then they came. Slowly, at first, some limping out from their pen. There was an air of uncertainty about them, as though thinking this a trick. One man met Jon's eyes, and Jon offered him a silent nod. Submit and you will not starve, he said with his gaze. More followed soon after, when they saw that no harm had befallen those who had gone before. A few turned for the forest and wandered into the icy shadows, however, ever untrusting. Southrons called these men wildlings. It was telling that they did not agree, and preferred themselves the free folk. But it was not many who rejected the offer of safety for freedom. No more than 1 in 10 went into the woods, away from Melisandre. More whites for the others, Jon reflected sadly. Much as he misliked Melisandre, she was still by far the lesser of two evils. Soon enough, they were even kneeling. The Lord of Bones knelt first, and then the rest followed. Jon shivered at the sight. It is too cold for this mummer's show. The free folk despised kneelers. Jon had advised against this particular requirement, but again he went ignored. Now getting the rest of the chiefs to agree to peace would become just that little bit harder. The majority of them were still behind the wall, and they would hear of this from those who had chosen to wander north. Even among those who chose to stay, much as he looked, Jon found no true loyalty in the free folk as they were herded to warmth and food. Only hunger. It was Mance they chose, he thought. Offer them food in plenty and you may make them kneel, but they will never make you king. And it would be his men who would bear the brunt of that. The Watch may be able to make the free folk bleed, and we may be slowly growing, but in the end we are still too small to stop them. It was an impossible circumstance, and that was without accounting for the possibility that both Mance and the Horn of Joramun could be hiding somewhere, unburned and unharmed. And so in the end all we can do is wait, Jon thought resignedly, and make use of this peace as best we can whilst it still persists. Got. Chapter 52, Cersei I. Cersei Pav. Dragonstone is yours. What a stupid thing to say, Cersei thought as she sat in the throne room, watching Garland Tyrell kneel before his king, an irrepressible grin tugging at his lips. Dragonstone is yours. Was that something to be proud of? A piddling stone jutting out of the sea. What was that miserable, windswept rock really worth? Robert had won her a whole 7 kingdoms. Jaime had won a dozen true battles, and killed a king with a single swipe of his sword. By what right can a simple rock grant you glory from a king? Cersei wondered, but she held her peace and let Tommen speak all the way till court wound down to a close. Jaime could have taken it half a day. Nevertheless, Garland Tyrell got his glory, and his return from his victory at Dragonstone heralded the arrival of a hellish week. The usual fare of gold and red and black that decked the halls of the Red Keep briefly turned green, in honor of the success. Tommen was keen to emphasize the first true victory of his reign. Red lions became roses. There was merriment in the mud-soaked streets. Marjorie and her hens seemed to never stop clucking, chittering and chattering with the kinds of smiles on their faces that made Cersei want to reach over and slap them back and forth across their rosy cheeks till they were all bloody. I am a queen who has lost her court, Cersei lamented. I have my pride and yet no power. I sit on the small council and say nothing. And day after day, that whore from Highgarden thinks to take a little more of what I have left. It was becoming increasingly hard to control her irritation as of late, Cersei found. Jaime was gone, despite her best efforts. Osney had disappeared without a trace, and without being able to account for him she could not rest. All he needs do is open his mouth and I'm ruined. Yet he is not entirely necessary. Marjorie Tyrell has a great many admirers, any one of which could wind up in her bed. When she prayed, she switched back and forth between praying for his return and praying for proof of his painful demise. Yet, not even his brother Osmond could offer that. She came upon him in the yard the day after Garland's return, as he was sparring with the one remaining Redwyn twin. She sat and watched for a while, quietly seething, and then called Esser Osmond aside. Walk with me a bit, she commanded him, and then once they were far enough away from prying ears she continued, and tell me the truth. Your brother Esser Osney. Where has he gotten to? Osmond frowned. I don't know, he said. The king told me he had some task for him, and I haven't seen him since. Cersei stiffened with alarm. The king? She asked, feeling her heart briefly seize in her chest. I've been found out. Was it the dreams? Osmond said. My brother's a good sword. Not as strong as me or Osfride, but he's quick enough to the kill. Yes, Cersei cut him off before he could continue, suddenly uninterested in what he had to say. Then, she said her farewells and left him, scowling all the way back to her chambers. Up the stairs she went, passing through the passages of Maegor's Holdfast at a quick pace. She slowed as she walked past Tommen's Solar, but thought better of it at the last second and continued on towards her chambers. If he will say naught to me then I need not concern myself with confrontation, she told herself. I will meet his silence with silence. He will come to me of his own volition, when he learns what it truly means to rule. He will learn from my example once he sees my hour in the sun. Inside her chamber, Cersei found none other than Taena, sat talking with Dorcas and Jocelyn. They stood and bowed their heads when she entered, but Cersei did not deign to acknowledge them. Instead she went for the wine, pouring herself a healthy glass and taking a sizable swig as she sat herself at her table. Unable to stand the looks that timid Jocelyn was shooting Dorcas, Cersei sent the pair of them away to prepare her a bath. After what felt like an entire day in the company of the Tyrells, she felt a sudden urge to purge herself of the lingering stench of the rose perfume they all seemed to wear. Is something the matter, Your Grace? Taena asked once they were alone. Cersei felt herself flatten in disappointment. I am sure you already know, she said. I will not speak of it further. Taena nodded. Undeserved praise, I know, but a victory is still a victory, regardless of what soldier did the fighting. The king's commands cannot be ignored. What about the queen's commands? Cersei asked bitterly. You need only say the word, Your Grace, Taena said, her head bowed, her lashes fluttering seductively. My loyalty is to you and to the little king only. I desire only to serve you, however you might require. Cersei felt a small smile tug on her lips as her mood suddenly went from quietly apoplectic to contemplative. I would be ever so sad if you ever betrayed my trust, Taena, she purred like a cat. I would have no choice but to give you to the king's justice, though you ought to know I would weep all the while. Taena shook her head, her curly hair bobbing. I will never give you cause to weep, Your Grace. And I assure you, any words you share with me will fall on no other ears save my own without your express assent. Cersei sipped her wine as she listened to the sounds of the bath being filled by buckets in the adjoining room. When the water stopped, and a sweaty Dorcas came in to announce that her bath was ready, Cersei stood from her seat and gestured for Taena to follow. In the adjoining room, Cersei dismissed Jocelyn and Dorcas before she stripped down and slowly immersed herself in the bathwater, her golden tresses floating on the surface, her breasts glistening half with sweat and half with water as steam filled the room. I'm still beautiful, Cersei knew as she saw Taena stare wide-eyed at her in the water. Jaime was a fool to spurn me. Come, Taena, Cersei beckoned. Join me. I require your service. Taena nodded almost timidly, and then slowly stripped from her dress and gingerly climbed into the steaming water, causing it to rise and spill over the edge of the tub. As she entered, Cersei watched her. The Myrish woman was beautiful, long-legged and full-breasted with smooth skin and ripe nether lips and huge dark nipples. She looked and smelled of sin, though her usually sultry demeanor had shied somewhat now that she was completely exposed. Robert would have loved her, Cersei thought, if only for an hour. Even still, she would have been one of his finest whores, and had he chosen her I don't doubt she would have been bred a dozen times over and borne him many bastard children by now. Tell me, Taina, Cersei began, watching her bare body for even the slightest hint of deception, have you seen or heard of Esser Osni as of late? Taina shook her head slowly, uncertain, her hair becoming wet in the water, her curls softening. No, your grace. Cersei felt her eyes narrow slightly with suspicion, but even as her gaze flicked up and down Taina's sultry curves, she saw no lie. A sudden fury filled her again as she continued watching Taina shift beneath the surface of the bathwater. Regarding Lady Margaery, Taina ventured, breaking the lingering silence. I believe there may be another way to undermine her. Cersei slid one of her feet between Taina's legs to rub her lower lips, and watched as the Myrish woman's mouth opened with surprise, her lashes fluttering in anticipation of further pleasure. Taina slowly splayed her thighs, bit her lip and began gently caressing one of her own breasts, silently begging for one of Cersei's toes to push forwards into her. What a little slut you are, Cersei thought, briefly distracted. But alas, there would be naught but teasing today, for her plots took priority over her pleasure, no matter how much she enjoyed toying with the Myrish woman. Do go on, Cersei urged with a coy smile that promised rewards. Well, your grace, Taina slowly answered, forcing herself back into full awareness. As I understand it, the Princess Arianne has expressed some significant interest in his grace. What better way to loosen Lady Margaery's grip in the absence of Esser Osni than to threaten her position at the king's side? And hand my son over to that Dornish whore in the process. Cersei thought, suddenly furious as her smile soured into a scowl. She thrust forwards with her foot to elicit a sharp yelp of pain from Taina, demonstrating her dissatisfaction with the suggestion. That princess is far too daring and far too dangerous, Cersei knew. Especially with my Myrcella all alone in Prince Doran's custody, I cannot humble her for fear of retribution. Hells, even Maid Margaery, insufferable as she is a better choice. No, said Cersei in a tone that left no room for argument. I will not pull my son away from one harlot only to push him into the arms of another. And I will not hear of this again, do you understand? Got. Chapter 53, Cersei 2. No, said Cersei in a tone that left no room for argument. I will not pull my son away from one harlot only to push him into the arms of another. And I will not hear of this again, do you understand? Taina nodded silently as Cersei let her fury fade and her focus move onto another matter. It all began with Bronn, Cersei thought, sliding her second foot into the space between Taina's legs. That insolent sellsword allowed my son to see his dreams done. Have you heard anything from Stokeworth? Cersei suddenly asked, still rubbing with the balls of her feet. Yes, your grace. Lady Lolly's birthed a bastard son not long after her wedding, the one she had sired upon her during the riots. You mean when she was raped 100 times? Cersei asked nonchalantly, jabbing forwards with both her feet to elicit another yelp from Taina. Yes, your grace, Taina said in a shaky voice, seemingly no longer eager to speak on the subject. Lady Tanda was thrown from her horse as well, it would seem, and shattered a hip. Maester Franken remains hopeful, but Felice does not seem to agree in her letters. She begs we pray for her mother. How awfully convenient for the conniving sellsword, Cersei thought. Poor dear, Cersei said without a hint of sincerity in her voice. I will put her in my prayers the next time I visit the sept. Not that it will do much good. She will be dead by the end of the month. Women as old as Tanda Stokeworth do not survive shattered hips. Still, perhaps there is an opening here. If only Felice could be convinced her mother's tumble was more assassination than accident. I am certain Felice will be overjoyed to hear it, Taina said. She has ridden from the road as well, of being accosted by men she described as lice-ridden ruffians bearing holy stars and sharpened sticks with evil looks in their eyes. Felice is safe, I am certain your grace will be relieved to know, and not far from the city now. Her husband warded the men away, but she nonetheless considers the encounter noteworthy. More sparrows, no doubt, Cersei said. They are a pest. Yes, your grace, Taina readily agreed. Though mercifully in King's Landing they are the small in number and shrinking fast, such that they can no longer clog the streets and fill the air with the awful stench of their unwashed bodies. Cersei nodded, but in her mind another idea intruded. The High Septon is Tyrion's man, she remembered. Hardly a trustworthy man to lead an institution as important as the faith, even in light of Tyrion's supposed innocence. The sparrows could have proved useful in that regard, but perhaps there is yet another way. Prince Oberyn's niece may have been too powerful to manipulate without fear of consequences, but perhaps his bastard's daughters would prove more pliable. The one always in the white would work best with the High Septon, Cersei thought, especially if she is not quite as pure and pious as her manner of dress might suggest. Cersei leaned back in the tub and sighed, stewing a little while longer in the no-tepid water, her toes working between Taena's legs. She could have stayed here a great deal longer if she so desired, plotting and scheming and pondering possibilities both outlandish and inevitable, but a small council meeting stood between her and rest. As tedious as they typically were, Cersei was determined not to miss a single one, lest she lose what little true power she still possessed. I must go, Cersei suddenly declared as she lifted herself from the rapidly cooling bath. Water ran down her legs in little rivulets and trickled down her hair. I need to dress for the small council, Taena. Come, dry me and help me don my gown. Taena practically leapt from the water, and together the pair of them were dressed, though Cersei reveled in seeing Taena's eyes wander as she rubbed her down and helped lace her bejeweled bodice and do her hair up in elegant braids. Her new gown was green, though the emerald of her eyes instead of the earthy tones of the Tyrells, and made of a shimmering silk cut in tight at the waist and over the bust, with black Myrish lace around the hem and neckline. Myrish lace was expensive, but Cersei refused to bow to Tommen's commands to cut spending on such luxuries. It was a necessity for a queen to look her best at all times, after all. Once she was dressed, Cersei left Taena with a flourish, headed once again for the small council chambers. Through the familiar halls and passages of Maegor's Holdfast she went, all the way to the small council chambers. Upon her arrival she brushed past Esser Osmond and passed through the doors to find her son sat at the head of the table, many of the lords already arrayed around him. Her father had found his place at the foot, a counterbalance to his king. Tyrion had wound up somewhere in the middle, sat between a very jolly-looking Lord Mace and a somewhat less enthusiastic Grandmaster Pycelle. Cersei found her seat facing in direct opposition to her dwarf brother, shooting him a briefly venomous look before she turned her attention elsewhere. Arianne, significantly, seemed absent from this particular session. Likely busy trying to bed the returning champion, Cersei thought. Or even better, his sister. She had become irritatingly close with Marjorie's hens as of late. Another problem to look out for. It seemed likely. Perhaps there is something to Taena's suggestion, Cersei thought. That Dornish whore is good only for what lies between her legs. Yet if I can turn her lust into leverage. Lying with a princess could surely be made into as significant a scandal for the young queen as lying with a knight. It would take only a single drunken tryst between the two of them to undermine Tommen's trust in his new wife. And even better, as Arianne was a princess, Tommen could hardly make her disappear, as he had seemingly done to Esser Osni. And with that thought brewing in her mind, the council began in earnest. It started with another unfortunately hearty congratulation of Lord Mace's accursed seed, and Cersei plastered a false smile over her face as she applauded the fat flower of Highgarden for his son's victory as he grinned from ear to ear with pride, red-faced from all the wine he had imbibed. Let the fat fool smile, Cersei thought. So long as that's all he's ever able to do. Next came the issue of the Redwyne fleet, which was resolved swiftly enough. A part of the fleet would remain at Dragonstone to maintain shipments of dragonglass to the Wall even as Lord Redwyne returned. On this issue Tommen was curiously unwilling to listen to any objections, though Cersei struggled to see the sense in it. Nevertheless, she considered it a non-issue. What use will a few shards of brittle stone do Stannis or that bastard son of Ned Stark? We have the true steel. And all the better if the Reach's strength is divided. It is only right that the crown should control the seas. And finally there came the issue of the faith. The High Septon may have been Tyrion's man, a puppet, but that did not render him immune from the demands of the most devout. And the most devout would never accept simply forgiving the debts owed to them by the crown. And yet, many casks of wildfire had been found and removed from under the floor of the great sept of Baelor. Casks that the crown had kindly seen to the safe disposal of, acting in accordance with its duty to serve as the protector of the faith. In a sense, they all owed their lives to the Iron Throne. And so, with the High Septon warily eyeing the rest of the council, Tommen calmly and politely began backing him into a corner. The High Septon offered wise words and worthless platitudes, but no matter how much he twisted and squirmed and tried to waggle his tongue, he was helpless to escape Tommen's carefully woven web. That boy has a way with words beyond me, Cersei thought as she watched him build his argument with an almost enviable effortlessness. I have just saved the city and your sept from the legacy of the last Targaryen king. I am fighting to defend the faith as the warrior would have me do, against heathen pretenders whose greatest desires are to destroy you by burning or drowning. I am rebuilding Westeros at the command of the smith and relieving the poor and the infirm of their burdens at the mother's behest. All I ask of you is to help me in this. To help me better serve the seven. GOT. Chapter 54. Cersei 3. I am fighting to defend the faith as the warrior would have me do, against heathen pretenders whose greatest desires are to destroy you by burning or drowning. I am rebuilding Westeros at the command of the smith and relieving the poor and the infirm of their burdens at the mother's behest. All I ask of you is to help me in this. To help me better serve the seven. Listening to the way he told his tale, Cersei could almost have believed her son if he had said he was the second coming of Huger of the Hill. In the face of all that, how could the High Septon possibly refuse the king's requests? A debt reduction was a tiny price to pay for such a devout king, especially after the faith had endured a drunkard and a madman. And so with the High Septon thoroughly convinced, the small council finally drew to a close. Dismissed, Tommen said with a lazy wave of his hand, and all the lords arose from their seats and filed from the chamber. Cersei insolently kept her seat, however, and sat and observed her son as he appeared to age before her eyes, the sparkle in his eyes replaced by a solemnity that she remembered seeing only in the eyes of men more than thrice the age of her son. Exhaustion laced his expression. His dreams are draining the life from him, she thought. I said my counselors were all dismissed, mother. I do believe that includes you as well. A mother can't steal a moment to speak with her son. Cersei asked. A mother can, Tommen sighed, looking up from his sheaf of papers and rubbing his eyes in the ever-developing dark circles underneath. I should ask him about Esser Osney, Cersei thought, yet when she went to open her mouth, something stopped the words in her throat. Instead she asked, about Dragonstone. Tommen groaned with irritation. I have my reasons, he said. And I'll brook no more argument on the subject. Does this have anything to do with that doom of Westeros you spoke of? Cersei asked, feigning concern even as a morbid bemusement tickled her chest. Tommen smiled and let slip a harsh bark of childish laughter as he leaned back in his seat. You must think me a fool. Placing so much stock in a few nightmares. Not at all, Cersei cut in, thinking of Maggie the frog. I know better than most how unsettling such things can be. I just need to know. Why dragonglass? What's so special about that dull black stone? Tommen fell silent, observed her with a strange intensity for what felt like an eternity, and then finally shook his head and said, it's the only thing that kills them that we can control and safely make use of at scale. Valyrian steel works too, but we haven't enough, and whilst wildfire is another choice, I am not yet desperate enough to consider such a dangerous substance. What we dig out of the ground from the Mad King's plan must suffice for now. Cersei frowned in confusion. Them. The others, Tommen said with a wry wave of his hand. The Grumpkins and the Snarks. The long night come again, an endless winter that will kill us all if we are not ready. Cribside tales meant to scare disobedient children, surely, Cersei could not help but scoff. Or at least long-forgotten history. Like the dragons slowly growing in the east? Tommen asked, with a single eyebrow raised. Like prophetic dreams. How much difference is there really between then and now? Tommen shrugged. Regardless, even if the gods are merciful and I am wrong, it still serves as leverage. The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch believes the threat lurking beyond the wall to be true, and so long as I control his supply of dragonglass I can effectively control his behavior to some degree. All the better that Dragonstone is the seat of Stannis's power. With it gone, any lingering support for Stannis in the Stormlands will shortly fade away. Thereby leaving him even more isolated, Cersei surmised. Tommen nodded. And once Lord Wyman's newfound loyalty can be assured, and he has delivered all lords east of the knife, the Boltons will be removed and my hold over the north will be tightened till any lingering traces of treason are completely quashed. And all without a single battle fought or a single one of my soldiers dead. In this way the enemy of my enemy becomes my ally, and Stannis will find himself completely surrounded. An enemy to the north in the Watch, to the east in Lord Wyman, to the west in the Ironborn, to the south in the Crown. Perhaps then I can convince him of the error of his ways. Stannis will change his mind when the deserts of Dorne become freezing marshes, Cersei thought, but kept her peace. Even if Stannis was not truly Tommen's uncle, it made sense for her son not to be too eager to be seen as a kinslayer, though Cersei suspected this was more a matter of being soft-hearted than sensible. I thought Lord Bolton was our ally, she remarked instead. Lord Bolton is as untrustworthy as Walder Frey, Tommen spat. Why do you think I've resisted any attempt at legitimizing his bastard son? If the Boltons sink their claws too deep into the north, they will become too powerful to easily dispose of, and if that happens, I can promise you they will not stay loyal to the Iron Throne for long. Best to keep them weak and dependent on us for legitimacy till a more appropriately loyal Lord of the North can be located. And your dreams tell you all this? Cersei asked, a lone eyebrow quirked, still skeptical despite the evidence of her eyes and ears. My dreams tell me a great deal, Tommen said, rubbing his reddened eyes tiredly, most of which is meaningless nonsense. But I also do happen to pay attention when people speak up with knowledge or advice, even if I may not always agree. I'm clever enough to seek out and learn what I don't know from my counselors, which is what allows me to parse through the possibilities I am presented with every time my head touches my pillow. Cersei observed her son, two equal twinges of pity and pride tugging at her heart. It was clear he was struggling under the burden of the crown, even if he had taken to courtly intrigue like a fish to water. Joff fared better even with war threatening to break through the gates, Cersei remembered. Tommen had never been so hardy. What do you see in your dreams? She asked, intending to lead him with the tone of her voice. Tommen's eyes sharpened. Someone's awfully curious today, he noted. Cersei shrugged and impudently said, a mother can't ask questions of her son. The ghost of a wan smile tugged at Tommen's lips even as his gaze drifted down from her face to her body, eyes so incisive that Cersei felt as though he was gazing straight through the silk of her gown at her naked flesh. I see too much, mother. Far, far too much. He stood up from his seat, gathering up the sheaf of papers before him on the table into a bundle in his arms, wandered around the table and pressed a kiss to her cheek. Yet you mustn't fret, Tommen continued, patting her shoulder. Sir Osney is not likely to see another summer intact. Your secrets are safe with me so long as from this day forth I can trust your loyalty. You can, Cersei hurriedly assured him, pulling him into a tight embrace as she arose from her seat and planted a kiss on the top of his head, even as she felt a spike of annoyance at the tone he had just taken with her. I acted only with the best of intentions, out of my love for you. I am your mother. I am the only person you can trust. Of course. Tommen agreed, pulling away from her arms, lifting his head from her breast to meet her emerald gaze with his own. So long as the plots come to a stop. I feel like with this chapter the story has become a bit bogged down. I'll try and speed things up from here on out. Feel free to comment and let me know what you think. GOT, Chapter 55, Pirate's Eye. When Asha Greyjoy's fleet entered Blackwater Bay, a not insignificant amount of alarm ensued. Tales of Ironborn raids were well known, even here on the far side of Westeros. Rape and murder and plunder. And so when the Kraken hove into view across the horizon, carried upon the sails of Ironborn longships, the panic was all very understandable. And to me, quite amusing. Mercifully, the reality of the matter was revealed swiftly enough as the true extent of the Ironborn force became apparent, the ships struggling against the unfavorable winds, eventually abandoning their sails in favor of oars. No more than perhaps a dozen longships made for the docks of King's Landing, a significant force to be sure, but not nearly enough to mount anything resembling a true raid. The gold cloaks were sent to man the defenses at my command in case anything went awry, not that I anticipated any difficulties, even as another detachment of the City Watch set about protecting the peace from any sudden panic. I had sat and watched the ships near the dock from one of the terraces of the Red Keep, with what I presumed was the Black Wind leading the lot, aware of the air of palpable tension around me. Rows of guards stood in tense silence. Here they were watching their city presumably about to be raided, and their king was sat perfectly calm, smiling against the ocean breeze, feasting on some of the last fresh slices of peach of the season. I could not help but imagine what a queer sight it must have seemed to them, after the tempestuous chaos of Joffrey and Cersei and Robert, to see such placid confidence on the face of a king, even if it was partly an act. Yet once the number of ships was known to me, any lingering notion of danger promptly disappeared. Asha Greyjoy, for all her arrogance, would not be stupid enough to sail so brazenly to her own demise. And any other captain stupid or brave enough to venture into King's Landing would likely go under the cover of night, hoping to leverage the element of surprise, and with far greater numbers besides. Even still, as the minutes passed, I was gratified to be proven right. In the distance I could see the little figures of the Ironborn longships slowly approaching the dock, rolling across the relatively calm waters of the bay, which occasionally glittered as the sun peeked through the clouds. Then the ships slowed to a stop, only to send a single man out on a rowboat the rest of the way to finish the journey, presumably to ensure they were not falling into a trap. When he reached the quays, he was pulled ashore and out of sight, though not 5 minutes later he was back in his boat again, returning to the waiting rows of longships, his arms furiously working the oars. When he arrived, a lull ensued, and then 3 ships slowly pulled into port and began lowering their gangplanks. I knew it had been a good idea to send Tyrion to greet them. His silver tongue had once again availed itself. Finishing my slices of peach, I sent the plate back to the kitchens in the arms of a servant and cleaned myself with a damp cloth, gently stirring the cat curled up in my lap from its slumber, and set off for my solar. Though the view was pleasant and the autumnal ocean breeze refreshingly bracing, a more formal setting would no doubt grant me greater leverage over the ironborn captain. Across a desk, outnumbered with guards waiting outside in her capacity for violence effectively neutered, Asha would be out of her element, stripped of all advantages. And though a witty woman she might still have been, she was still working blind. I wasn't. Still, it was never wise to leave oneself unprotected, especially when faced with a woman well known for wildness. In place of a cat I laid a crossbow across my lap, and loaded a single bolt, a dagger hidden at my hip. If she really was stupid enough to try anything, a single shot would be enough to end her. And so when Asha arrived at the door of my solar perhaps a half-hour after setting foot on solid ground, I was prepared. There were some briefly raised voices outside, but then Sir Loras poked his head through the door to announce her arrival, an open scowl on his face at having to tolerate the presence of the Ironborn, that plague upon his people. She sauntered in not a second later, a slightly sour look on her face as Loras shot her a baleful glance and returned to his post, her usual choice of weapon the hardy dirk surrendered at the door. She was a lean and long-legged woman, with a wiry sort of strength evident in her slim build, even beneath her jerkin. It was open at the front, showing the brown tunic she wore underneath hanging loosely off her breasts, an intentional decision, no doubt, in the rounded waistline of her green woolen breeches. There was no mistaking the womanly figure beneath the loose fabrics. A certain sense of caution defined her gait, even as she tried to project an air of confidence with her back straight, her head held high and her hips swaying from side to side. Her dark eyes darted up and down me from over her nose a touch too large for her face, searching for something before settling on the weapon sat quite openly on my lap, my fingers gently stroking the woodwork like it was a purring kitten. She wandered to the other side of my desk without a word, pulled herself a chair without my permission, sat herself down and then offered me wicked smirk, almost as if daring me to object. Doubtless she meant to unsettle me with the silent show of disrespect, judging me by the fat still lingering in my cheeks and my short stature to possess the disposition of the child I technically still was, without the stomach to use the weapon in my arms. Her eyes flicked briefly to the door, no doubt thinking some other lord would enter, the true power behind the throne. I returned her smile, my wedding ring tapping the wood of the crossbow just once as I broke the silence. I gather you understood the offer in my letter. I opened without delay, without exchanging so much as a single pleasantry. Asha's eyes narrowed slightly. You? She asked, incredulous. You look young enough to still be suckling at your mother's teats. Not my mother's, I japed, offering her chest a very pointed glance, but I have been known to enjoy a nice pair of teats from time to time. You ought to meet my wife. I imagine we could all find a great deal of enjoyment in each other's company. But now I must ask again, did you understand it? I did, she returned without hesitation, though with a hint of suspicion lacing her tone. And, Asha licked her lips. You will offer us independence? She asked. A route to raid Essos? No, I said bluntly. That offer was predicated on your success in the Kingsmoot. Euron sits the seastone chair in your place. War is now inevitable. And so, my lady, independence is something I am no longer willing to offer. Asha's expression soured. And yet, that does not mean we cannot come to some agreement. Asha clenched her teeth, and then unclenched them with a sigh. I will not treat with a child, she spat, acting insulted. And you are too young for my tastes anyhow. Where is your regent? Your hand. I much prefer real men to share my bed, though I'll admit you might make a good maid. I snorted at her deliberate misinterpretation of my words. You know, a great many men would say that trying to reason with a woman is a waste of time. I am beginning to understand what they mean. Here I am, intent on deciding the fate of your lands, and all you can think to do is speak of what lies between your legs. Give me your terms, she bit out, scowling. I will seat you on the seastone chair after I win it from your uncle, though as a lady this time, not as a princess or queen, and even grant the Iron Fleet safe passage to the Stepstones to raid, so long as you can promise to bring the raids on Westerosi trade and territory to an end, as well as any raids on allies of the crown, chiefly the Bravo Sea. You will pay taxes on the incomes derived from these raids, of course. The Iron Islands will remain under the authority of the Iron Throne, with the understanding that so much as a single rebellion will result in a complete eradication of all captains and lords in the islands, as well as a full occupation by a combined force of Westermen, Northmen, Reachmen and Riverlanders, whom I assure you will be less than kind to whatever will remain of your kin. GOT. Chapter 56. Pirates 2. With the understanding that so much as a single rebellion will result in a complete eradication of all captains and lords in the islands, as well as a full occupation by a combined force of Westermen, Northmen, Reachmen and Riverlanders, whom I assure you will be less than kind to whatever will remain of your kin. Asha seemed newly incensed. You make such threats and still expect me to agree. I should have thought I was being kind, I retorted. I do not need you, nor your people. I do not desire their destruction, of course, but in the face of such circumstances one must be firm, and if I must go myself to slit the throat of every man, woman and child then I will. I let my smile briefly turn into a snarl. Her dark eyes widened slightly in disbelief at the sudden turn in my demeanor. Do not mistake my mercy nor my desire for peace for weakness. Remember I was raised in the lap of my late father, King Robert Baratheon, who bested Balin without so much as breaking a sweat, and that I am the grandson of Lord Tywin. If pushed, I can and will make the Rhines of Castamere look fortunate in their fate after I'm finished with you and all your ilk. Then my smile slowly returned as I relaxed back into my seat. But if the Ironborn can be welcomed back into the fold, the old way turned against our common slaving enemies in the east, and Lord Quellen's grand ambitions accomplished, then I should much prefer to do just that. And all this out of the goodness of your heart? Asha asked, her voice thick with an almost sarcastic skepticism, still visibly wary at seeing the venom and vitriol of which I was capable, and the speed at which my fury seemed to wax and wane. There will be a more direct price, of course, I said. Firstly, there is the issue of hostages. I understand you have Lady Glover and her children with you. Asha sat briefly stunned. How? The crown has eyes and ears in every corner of its lands, I assured her nonchalantly, as though the exercise of such power was routine. Even in those areas presumed to be under the control of our enemies. Not a single word said nor written in Westeros goes unheard or unread. Regardless, I expect any such hostages to be handed over to me without hesitation. Secondly, the Ironborn under your authority will cede any claims on any part of the Westerosi mainland, and withdraw from any occupied territories immediately upon your ascension. Now, if this goes well I will see to it that you are granted royal assent for expansion into the Stepstones as well the construction of trading ports and towns, the creation of a shipping guild, a real presence beyond simple piracy, potentially even one day permitting you the authority to collect tolls for the crown. Asha nodded, her jaw tight even as her eyes glinted with greed. The North gave us precious little but pebbles and scars. To give it up is no great loss. I smiled widely, almost from ear to ear. Who knew Asha Greyjoy of all people would prove so pragmatic? Excellent. So then. Not yet, Asha cut in over me. I have some conditions of my own I want met before I agree to anything. I nodded, my smile wilting on my lips. I suppose that's only fair. Very well, let's hear them. I want my nuncle left alive, she started. Euron you may need to slay, but Victarion will live. I will have need of him to exert my authority. Him and Roderick Harlaw. I see no issue with keeping Lord Harlaw alive, I said. From what I understand he is an eminently reasonable man at least by the standards of the Ironborn. Hells, I might even elevate his kin. Any handsome young men in his house you fancy for a husband. I allowed myself a little grin before I became grim again. As for Victarion, that will be more difficult, and there is no guarantee, but it is doable. Of course, assuming he does not pass in the midst of battle, I shall still have to punish him. He is after all a traitor. But in place of a life a limb will suffice. An arm or a leg should send an adequate message. Asha scowled again and stared me down in stubborn silence for a few long seconds. And as for the stepstones, Asha pressed on, conceding my point, I want those now. I want to be able to sail my ships out of the bay and begin building my fortune and asserting my claim without delay. I need something substantial to satisfy the Ironmen upon sitting the Seastone chair. Something to rally their spirits to my rule, quell their thirst for conquest, and hold back the inevitable calls for rebellion. Now that point was a tad more difficult to concede, even if her justification was surprisingly compelling. And what assurance have I that you won't run off someplace beyond my power, or get yourself killed, or even go back to your uncles to warn them and hinder my plans? You have none, she spat. You'll just have to trust me. Hard to do with a woman so wanton, I snapped back. Yet I believe I can agree to even that so long as I can claim a few hostages from your crew, and replace them with an agent of my own to keep you honest. Earl Harlaw and Hagen's daughter should suffice, so long as I can be certain that you understand the consequences for breaking whatever pact we make today. If you do not answer my call when the time comes, if you disobey me in any way, I will know and I will do precisely as I threatened to. Men, women, children. None will be spared my wrath. Asha cocked her head to one side in silent outrage, but nonetheless nodded. I could tell I was more than beginning to test the limits of her tolerance with these threats. Yet still her ambition stayed her hand and held her tongue even as she again eyed the crossbow held tight in my arms. More concerning for me was that my words were not empty. The Ironborn were a pest, none could argue that. Yet women, children. That had been a spur-of-the-moment addition, meant to better sell the threat. Even still, I could not help but note how easy it was to condemn an entire people to death from on high. And I want to keep whatever land in the stepstones I can control if you don't deliver, she added at the last second. A little fiefdom to call your own, I chuckled, shrugging. Well enough, not that you need worry. Disposing of Euron may be expensive, but I can assure you it will be easy enough for me. I smiled, my lips stretching almost to a grin. Now relax yourself, Lady Asha, for on this day you have won yourself a kingdom. Go, enjoy the delights of King's Landing for tonight whilst my scribes draw up the documents necessary for setting our agreement into stone. I will see you by the end of the week, and not long after all arrangements have been made you can set off with your fleet towards the stepstones, and establish yourselves around Torturer's Deep, which by all accounts seems the best suited place for such things. Asha stood from her seat slowly, eyes wordlessly meeting mine before she turned sharply on her heels and stormed out. I could not help the sigh that slipped past my lips at her departure. A dangerous woman, that one, volatile. I set the crossbow in my lap down on the floor, leaning it against the side of my desk. Yet not much more than a minute after I was alone I found Tywin Lannister walking through my door. GOT. Chapter 57, Pirates 3. I set the crossbow in my lap down on the floor, leaning it against the side of my desk. Yet not much more than a minute after I was alone I found Tywin Lannister walking through my door. I noticed the Greyjoy girl just left from here, he idly noted as he seated himself. No, not idly. Tywin Lannister was never idle. Yes, I said. And with any luck she'll prove herself quite useful to me. Tywin gave a curt nod. Care to enlighten me? He said. Of course, I said, and then gave him the abridged version of my encounter with Asha, watching his eyes observe mine carefully, almost warily. There was hint of approval in his gaze as I described my threats, and then concern at the deal I had struck. A foolish notion, he said bluntly after I was done. You have lured a hostage. Throw her in the tower cells and use her against her uncles. Why let leverage go? Because whilst Victarion might care, I said, Euron won't, and it is he who sits the seastone chair. And she came to me willingly besides. What would it say of the honor of the new king if he ordered a guest he invited to be imprisoned without just cause? So instead you will place her in prime position to threaten our trade with Essos? Tywin asked, his unchanging expression shifting just enough to hint at incredulousness. You would place such great faith in a Greyjoy? I will place her in prime position to deplete the fleets that Daenerys Targaryen might use to one day darken my door, I retorted. The fleets of slavers, which comprise the majority of trade passing through the stepstones in any case. Even if she turns on me, most of the damage she will be able to do will be to them. The trading ships of Tyrosh, Myr, Lee and the like frequent those routes far more than any Westerosi fleet. And I do not expect her to turn traitor so easily. Not after impressing upon her the intent behind my threats. Not after taking hostages of my own and placing one of mine among hers. I waved my hand dismissively through the air. The potential damage she can do is relatively minor in comparison to the benefit she can deliver. By placing Asha on the seastone chair instead of smashing it to pieces I can save as a costly occupation, and preserve the lives of the fighting men who could be put to much better use elsewhere like in the Vale or the North. In this case, winning the war is almost trivial, winning the peace almost impossible. Hence Asha's importance. Tywin nodded, still unsatisfied, but willing to accede to me that much. And how do you intend to win the war? Lady Asha gave me more than just her allegiance, she also gave me confirmation of something my men had long suspected but never been able to prove. I lied, grinning and gesturing to the door. You see, Euron is planning an attack on the Reach, with the hopes to plunder as much as possible and build the necessary power and support among the other Ironborn captains needed for more ambitious plots. I intend to take full advantage of the opportunity this plan presents. As such, grandfather, I was wondering if you would be so kind as to send for Lord Randall. He stood from his seat in silence, ventured briefly beyond the door to relay my orders to one of the guards, and then came back in and reclaimed his seat. The man you intend to place among Asha Greyjoy's crew, who will he be? I shrugged. That has yet to be decided, but I was rather thinking Sandor Clegane might suffice. Tywin quirked an eyebrow. Once a turncoat, a man cannot be trusted. And you expect the Hound to keep the Greyjoy girl honest? I'll have leverage to ensure his loyalty, I answered. At least according to what Arya tells me of their journey through the Riverlands. Give the two one last meeting and I do believe he'll do anything to come back to her. To be frank, he's the only real fighter one can think of who we can afford to take such risks with. If Asha kills him, it will be no great loss to us. Same if he turns tail. But if he redeems himself, I'll have one more man at my disposal. The only alternative I can think of might be one of the Kettleblacks, but given they are still spies for Baelish, I don't want him getting any funny ideas about forging alliances with the Ironmen. If they are spies, then why haven't you rooted them out? Tywin asked, apparently unfazed at the revelation. I have been building a trap for Baelish, I explained, and using the three brothers to feed him false information, to lull him into complacency. By what my own men tell me, the plan is working, though Esser Osmond appeared to have had a change of heart shortly after donning the white cloak, and has ceased feeding secrets to our enemies. With Esser Osni disposed of, that leaves only Osfryd to contend with, which is no great concern. Tywin nodded in approval. And your threats, he continued, his gaze intense, are they empty? I let a silence settle in as I mulled over the question, a long moment stretching to a minute, and then two. The curtains fluttered with the breeze, the flames in the hearth flickering to the sound of cloth gently flapping against stone. I don't know, I finally answered. I'd be willing to kill, that much I already know, but innocents. Women and children. All war requires a sliver of ice in your heart, Tywin said, in an oddly tender tone. Well, tender for Tywin, at any rate. It is good that you already understand this. But you can only know through experience. Have you ever taken a life before, Tommen? I shook my head. Not directly. I've commanded men killed, seen them die, but never by my own hand. And, to be entirely honest, I'm not eager to start slitting throats. It was a line I had yet to dare cross. Once I had sullied my own hands, I accepted that there was no return, no resolution. It was an act beyond intellectual plotting or assassination. Once I had killed, Westeros would have claimed my soul. Then that must change, Tywin said. Perhaps not today, but soon. To rule is to do a great many things, among which one is kill. And a weak man without the stomach for blood makes for neither an old monarch nor a wise one. I know, I said resignedly, just as Esser Loras entered to announce the presence of Lord Randall. Send him in, I said, and so he came. Lord Randall was a lean man, wiry and narrow with an iron will smoldering behind his eyes. His face was permanently set into the same expression, jaw clamped shut, eyes slightly narrowed, lips pursed and brow furrowed. His silver beard seemed to bristle around his jaw, rising to his ears before reaching his bald head, shaved completely smooth. He wore mail and boiled leathers covered by a mantle bearing the sigil of his house draped about his shoulders, Heartsbane's bejeweled sheath hanging from his hip. Come, I said, allowing a pleasant smile to pull on my features again, take a seat, my lord. Randall pulled himself a chair and settled himself in it. How can I serve you today, your grace? He asked in a flat tone, spying Lord Tywin from the corner of his eyes. Well, Lord Randall, I said, it seems as though I finally have a war for you to wage. GOT, Chapter 58, Jaime I. Though Littlefinger had been named Lord of Harrenhal, he seemed in no great haste to stake his claim. Jaime sighed. Of course not. Baelish was a traitor, destined for nothing more than an early burial. And so that task would fall to him. And what a task it was. That Harrenhal was in need of a good sorting out was in no doubt. The claim had been Gregor Clegane's before Cersei had called him back to King's Landing and the Red Viper had severed his small head from his seething corpse. Yet the Mountain's men had not left, and were no doubt still scurrying around the crumbling halls and passages like rats in a sewer drain. Unfit to restore the king's peace, the lot of them. The only peace any of these men had ever given anyone was that of the grave. His outriders had informed him that the gates to the castle were closed and barred, so Jaime drew up his men in force and sounded his horn, letting 3 sharp blasts announce his presence. After the sound had rolled off the surrounding hills and bounced off the stone and dissipated into the air, Jaime could hear the creaking of rusted iron hinges as the doors were slowly pushed open. Under a dozen different murder holes he rode with his men, bearing witness to the sheer hubris of Heron's folly, the tattered stones around him black on one side where Balerian's flames had licked them and gray on the other. He emerged into sudden moonlight from the flickering torchlight as he entered the yard, the hooves of the horses behind him falling silent as their journey over the hard-packed dirt occasionally dotted with weeds and rotting corpses came to an abrupt end. A handful of Gregor's men stood awaiting to greet him as yet more came streaming from the towers, their eyes hard as they watched him dismount. About the best that could be said of them as they were not quite as savage as the man they swore loyalty to. Gregor had been an animal. These men were merely cruel. Fuck me, one man said, slack-jawed. It's the fucking Kingslayer, boys. Jaime felt a dull spike of fury at the name, one he quickly suppressed to keep his icy composure. I am no more that man, he thought. His hook ached, his long-gone sword hand baying for blood. And who might you be? Jaime asked instead. They call me Shitmouth, they do, the man said, grinning. Do you hold command here? Jaime asked, impatient. Me? The man asked, almost incredulous. Shit, m'lord, no. Bugger me with a bloody spear. Esser Ilan, you heard the man, find a nice long one and shove it up his ass, Jaime said. He did not have a spear, but it was not long before one of the other men threw him one with a grin on his face. Shitmouth paled. Keep that bloody thing away from me, he said warily, stumbling back. Make up your mind, Jaime said. Or better yet, clean up your mouth. Now, if not you then who? Who has command here? Tolliver, another man said. Only he was killed. Him and the tickler both. By the hound, Jaime finished. At the Crossroads Inn, correct. His conclusion was met with a series of confused nods. Well, if nothing else you need not worry about the hound. He's been dealt with. I'm surprised such a thing was necessary. Did you not send men after him once you'd heard? Shitmouth frowned, as though this thought were entirely new to him. No, my lord. Phoo. Shitmouth caught himself. We never did. When a dog goes mad you cut its throat, Jaime said, doing his best impression of his father. His proclamation was met with a flurry of uncomfortable glances. You were all scared of him, he quickly surmised. Well, he were Sir's brother, so. Shitmouth tried to say. He was the hound, another interrupted. You'd have to be mad to go after him. Or someone better. Someone like Esser. Or like you. Jaime felt just a touch of discomfort at the looks in their eyes, admiration earned by another lie and a second spike of fury at being compared to the elder Clegane. If only you knew, he thought. As he was, even after all those months with Bronn, he did not doubt Sandor at full strength would make quick work of him. You have a name? He asked. Rafford, the man said soberly. Or Raff, if it please you. Jaime nodded in approval. Rafford, gather the garrison together in the Hall of 100 Hearths, and your captives too. All want to see them. Oh, and Hote as well. I was distraught to hear he had died. I'd have liked the pleasure of killing him myself. Even still, I'd like to gaze upon his head. And so the men went, and Jaime wandered to the hall himself to await the completion of his commands. In the meanwhile he sat and watched as one by one his men went around the hall and slowly set a fire in each hearth, giving the Hall of 100 Hearths its characteristically orange glow. Yet his breath still emerged from his lips in cold mist in the midst of night. It would take a while for the fires to displace the chill that had settled into the space. Before long, Hote's rotting head was dropped into his lap. The goat's lips had been sliced off, along with his ears and most of his nose, right down to a stubby little bit of bone that showed under the rotting flesh. It was Hote that much Jaime knew for sure by the greasy beard alone, but twisted beyond belief. Crows had supped his eyes, and only a few strips of shriveled skin stuck to his cheeks. Where is the rest of him? Jaime asked, steeling his stomach. Nobody seemed to want to answer, and so that burden fell to Rafford. Rotted, Esser, he said. And one of the prisoners was always begging for food, so we gave him the body to eat. Hands and feet, arms and legs. Esser said to see to it all the prisoners got a taste. Jaime felt the steel in his stomach rust and decay, sickened. The prospect of vengeance seemed to lose its shine right before him. 7 save us all, he thought, and tossed the rotting head into the nearest hearth. What little patches of fat remained on the flesh seemed to bubble and melt as the fire licked the skull clean and caught upon the grease in the beard, allowing the flames to climb higher and burn briefly brighter. I'll see those captives now, he said, remembering Tommen's orders. Starting with Esser Wireless Manderley. He the fat one? Rafford asked. Jaime nodded. He should be. And I warn you now, if he is no more for this world, Then you all will surely join him in his fate in short order. Rafford swallowed, nodded and then opted to bow, and then finally turned tail and ran. Not long after, a line of prisoners were pushed forth through the doors at sword point. Of Lady Went's people only a handful remained that Jaime remembered. A cook and an armorer, both looking half-starved, and a formerly pretty serving girl named Pia who'd no doubt been raped ragged, blood still staining her skirt. When she saw him she fell to her knees and clutched his legs and sobbed, mumbling pleas for mercy through shattered teeth and blood-stained lips, offering herself to him in desperation if only he would make her torment stop. Jaime felt disgust and pity in equal measure as he shook her off his leg, and the poor girl sobbed all the louder when he assured her that she would suffer no longer. This was not the pretty, giggling little chit Qyburn had sent to his chambers after he'd lost his arm. Mercifully, it seemed the other prisoners had been treated a little better. Wireless Manderley was the one Tommen had insisted on, but there were also several other highborn Northmen Gregor had captured during his campaigns along the Trident, each of whom would no doubt prove useful to the king. They were ragged, filthy, some bruised and others broken, but they were still alive in all the ways that mattered. And so, one hostage at a time, the North falls further into my nephew's hands, Jaime reflected. Into my son's hands. Got. Chapter 59, Jaime II. They were ragged, filthy, some bruised and others broken, but they were still alive in all the ways that mattered. And so, one hostage at a time, the North falls further into my nephew's hands, Jaime reflected. Into my son's hands. The wailing only intensified when Jaime informed each man of his fate. Wireless collapsed into a heap on the floor and wept in relief at the news that he would wind his way back to White Harbor, and though the others had more muted responses upon learning that the capital was their destination, the notion that they would be hostages of the king and not of the mountain's men seemed nonetheless welcome, and many broke down into tears of gratitude. He commanded them to sit at one end of the table, to sup with dignity and be silent. Their meal was simple fare, for the mountain's men apparently had little use for cooks. And once it was done, Jaime began issuing his commands. The mountain's men would be split up that he could not trust them was now clear. A third would go with a few of his own men to see to the delivery of Sir Wireless to the salt pans, where a Manderley ship would await, and another third would take the rest of the political prisoners down to the capital and present them before the king. The final third would accompany him, their presence supplanted by a force of 100 men from his own company who would hold Harrenhal in his trust. This third would be made of only the most savage, Jaime decided, save for Rafford. If nothing else they will make fine fodder for the walls of Riverrun, Jaime thought as he issued his commands. And breaking them up would surely lessen the risk for any further indiscretions, the kind the king was eager to put an end to. Not that Jaime had any silly notions of putting an end to such savage habits. Such cruel men were not like to change. Yet with cruelty came cowardice, and under his watch their worst tendencies would be restrained under threat of harsh consequences. That night Jaime slept with his sword at his side, satisfied at a day's work. The next morning he washed and dressed at dawn, and took advantage of the castle's rookery to write and send a few short messages back to the capital with news of his progress whilst Harrenhal was still quiet. Another raven went north, to inform his cousin at Riverrun of his intent to see to the siege himself. The very thought of meeting his Frey friends made him tense. The king's commands were clear enough, but Jaime had no desire to wind up like Robb Stark. And so another secret he'd have to keep till the time came to drop the pretense and start the slaughter. But his cousin could be trusted with the truth, Jaime was certain. He could be sworn to secrecy. But what of Aunt Jenna? Jaime sighed. That was a question for another day. Not long after he was done the noise returned as men set busily about making the necessary arrangements. The 4 groups were arranged, 3 heading out, 1 north, 1 south and 1 west, with 1 staying back. Jaime made sure the last lot were all loyal Lannister men. That would be important to seeing Tommen's other plans through. Parting words were offered, some touching and others tortuously mundane, and then Jaime sounded his horn again, impatient, and all the men were ahorse and riding out to do their duty. They rode for perhaps a little more than 2 days and made camp for 3 nights without incident, moving fast across rolling plains and fording several streams. Jaime made sure to keep them away from villages and towns. The cot may have been worse for his back than a bed, but if that meant there would be no trouble then Jaime considered it a sacrifice worth making. The Riverlanders had suffered their presence enough. If he could avoid bothering them, especially now that he had the mountain's men in tow, then he would. As it was, he had difficulty keeping the rowdiest men in line. 3 had lost their heads by the time the relatively short march was over. And so Derry hubbed into view. All around, the fields surrounding the castle were under the till. It was mostly women working the fields, Jaime noted, many of their sons and fathers and husbands and brothers lost to the war. Weeds were pulled by hand even as a number of plows were pulled by oxen as other women trailed, planting seeds every so often in the wake of the oxen and patting the earth flat. Seeds and plows paid for by the crown, Jaime did not doubt. Lady Emere Frey would be that type of woman. Just like Harrenhal, Jaime found the gates closed to him, looks of fear in the eyes of the women at the golden lion emblazoned on his armor. I have to get duller plate, he thought at first, but then thought better of it. With my sword hand perhaps the lion of Lannister is all that stays the hands of all who surround me. Nevertheless, it was enough for the gateman of Castle Derry to slowly swing open the doors when he blew his horn, and Jaime led his men yet again under the murder holes. Most stayed behind, making camp beyond the walls, but Jaime was not fool enough to wander into Frey hands without a fearsome guard. Within the walls, Jaime saw workmen flanked by crossbowmen and archers up on the ramparts, watching out of the corner of their eyes. The stones were blackened and some cracked. During the fighting Derry had been burned once and sacked at least twice, and the evidence of that was still all around, despite Lady Emere's continuing efforts. When he had finally arrived, only a lone maester emerged to greet him. Lord Commander, Derry is honored at this unexpected visit, he said. I was under the impression you were headed to see to the siege at Riverrun. I am here on behalf of my king, Jaime simply pronounced, dismounting and producing from under his armor a crumpled version of one of the letters that Tommen had given him whence he'd first been given this fool's quest. Mayhap the Seven will be kind and this little delay will allow me to keep my oath to Lady Catelyn to never take up arms against her family. Jaime resisted the urge to shudder at the thought. If the Seven are kind I'll never have to face her again. Very well, the maester said after a moment's silence. I know Lady Emere will be pleased to see you, and wished to welcome you herself. In fact, she's seeing to the preparation of a feast in your honor. It is her hope that you will join her at the table this evening. Jaime quirked an eyebrow in the style of his father. A hot meal would be most welcome, but I do hope this feast is not paid for with the funds the crown so generously provided. I'd hate to have to tell his grace that his generosity was being wasted on frivolities. Humble fare will suffice for me no more than the daily meal of the lordling. I come with purpose, not for pleasure. The maester nodded nervously. Yet I trust you'd still like me to show you to your chambers. Jaime nodded. And to a hot bath, if you would. The road has been long and hard and muddy and cold, and I think I can permit myself that much. The maester nodded, and they set off through the halls of Derry, ending with his chambers. Jaime did not spend much time there, and instead allowed his companions to strip him and fill the tub as he lowered himself into the water. Pia blushed as she saw his naked flesh, and Jaime had to restrain himself as he was suddenly reminded of the lovesick young slut she had been when she'd first slipped into his bed and tried to seduce him. Mercifully, she and all the rest left soon enough and Jaime was left alone in the water, letting his arousal slowly fade away. The prospect of so much time away from Cersei had taken its toll on his self-control. When he finally departed his room for the feast that night, he came dressed in fineries, though he left his whites and sword behind. His gilded hook glinted threateningly in the light of the lone hearth in the hall, its edge still razor-sharp. G.O.T. Chapter 60. Jaime III. When he finally departed his room for the feast that night, he came dressed in fineries, though he left his whites and sword behind. His gilded hook glinted threateningly in the light of the lone hearth in the hall, its edge still razor-sharp. My lord. Lady Emere Frey greeted him, curiously alone. She was a hardy wench to look at, that he could not deny. Long legs and smooth skin and full breasts that threatened to spill out the top of her dress. Such a shame her face let her down. She might have been pretty, but she would never beautiful. Is there nobody else to join us? Jaime asked. My poor mother is still in mourning, she said. Emere offered him a coy smile. In any case, I was rather under the impression that I was not allowed to spend the king's gold on such things. Those funds are meant for the fields and the keep, no. Of course, Jaime agreed as he sat himself and the food started to arrive, all in the arms of suspiciously buxom serving girls for a keep managed by a lady. Still, the food was good, and Jaime enjoyed eating something not burned or roasted after so many days on the road, and attacked his food with gusto. He used his hook to cut his bread and meat, the edge more than sufficient for the task. And before long, the subject turned to wolves. They've lost all fear in men, Lady Emere idly said. Packs of them just seem to attack our men randomly. We had to kill half an entire pack, a dozen of them yesterday before the others gathered the good sense to turn tail and flee. Jaime felt himself pale a shade, his appetite suddenly gone. He'd heard similar reports from some of his own men when he'd sent them out as scouts. Wolves watching, following, but only occasionally venturing so far as attacking. Lady Caitlin. I see, he cut in. And aside from wolves, have you any issues with warriors? Outlaws. Lady Amere lost her perpetually pleasant expression for a second as she scowled. Outlaws killed my father, she said. Lord Barrick's lot it seems like. And though we lost them we got reports of a one-eyed man and a hooded woman. Jaime steeled himself. A woman. Aye, Lady Amere said. The peasants would have us believe that this woman is an old one, with white eyes and a torn face. They claim it was the woman, not the man, who was handing out the orders. Seven save us all, Jaime reflected with horror. Lady Caitlyn's corpse truly does haunt these lands. Suddenly, he missed having Oathkeeper at his hip. No matter, Jaime told himself. Tommen had a plan. He's seen all this. I just need to have faith. Woman or man, Jaime said, feeling suddenly dizzy, they are scoundrels all the same. Amere nodded. My men have all been unsuccessful in finding those responsible for my father's fate, she said, her features almost shifting into a pretty sort of sadness. She reached over the table and reached to grip Jaime's hook. But I'm sure you could find them, Sir Jaime, she said in a lusty tone, fluttering her lashes. Please, my lord, I beg of you, stay and help us with Lord Barrick and this woman. Her hand caressed his hook almost seductively. Jaime cleared his throat and withdrew his hook, still feeling faintly queasy, reaching with his one remaining hand to produce the letter he had shown her maester earlier. Much as I appreciate your proposition, Lady Amere, he slid the letter over to her, my place remains besides my king. Even still, I do have a proposal of my own. Lady Amere unfurled the letter and read it quickly. A betrothal to your cousin Lancel. Sir Lancel, Jaime reminded her. It is a better match than most. Better than most, Amere agreed. I accept, of course. It is a great honor. Jaime nodded as he pushed his plate away. A great honor indeed, he said. Be grateful you hold a seat as significant as Derry. You are very lucky. Lannister lads are typically sought after, they do not seek. Amere had a coy smile on her face. Were you one of those lads, Sir? A long time ago, Jaime said, thinking of Cersei. Amere's smile grew slightly. Oh, not as long a time ago as you think, I would wager. Eager to have my hand, were you? Not so much your hand. Amere allowed her smile to slip from coy to suggestive. What would I tell Lancel? Jaime asked, still outwardly calm yet growing increasingly curious and frustrated. Who says he need know anything? Amere asked in such a tone, leaning forward as though to afford him the best possible view between her breasts and down her dress. I am not a maid in any case. You would not be despoiling anything for him. It can be our secret. The target of her touches went from his hook to his hand, caressing and stroking and massaging. You've sworn vows of celibacy how long, my lord? I can see the effect of those oaths all over your face, in the way your eyes linger. Deny it all you like, but I can see you want me. Don't worry, I won't say so much as a word to anyone. And you can have me any way you please. I don't deny I desire you, Jaime said, and snatched his hand away, apprehension and unease supplanted by anger as he arose from his seat, a fresh wave of arousal tightening his breeches. But I know better than to betray my oaths. You may not be a maid, but for Lancel's sake you will behave like one. No man other than him will you touch in that a way ever again, do you understand me? You will stay as pure as the maiden herself till he arrives from King's Landing. Amere cocked her head to one side, and then nodded. That should be no difficult thing, she said. I've heard Lancel is a handsome one, and gallant, like you. Easy enough to wait for, even for a wench like me. He's better than you deserve, certainly, Jaime spat, and stormed out. Through the halls and up the steps till he was back in the chambers the maester had given him, his guards in close pursuit as he left Derry's great hall. The sheer gall of that girl. It was one thing to keep secrets for his king, but that. Jaime shook his head, suddenly unhappy to be surrounded by stone walls and windows and shadows. He felt trapped. His arousal refused to abate. He went to the rookery and sent another message meant in this case for his uncle Kevin and then returned to his room to find his urges still threatening to overpower him. And so, in a fit perhaps of madness, he sent for her. Pia came into his room meek as a mouse, offered a deep bow, silent as she awaited his instructions. Look at me, Jaime commanded. Pia raised her head, and Jaime caught a glimpse of her mouth before her lips pursed. I've lost a limb and you've lost your looks, Jaime lamented. Still, at least she can close her mouth. I can hardly hide my hand, now can I? That night you came to my bed, just after I'd lost my hand, you claimed you'd always dreamed of me. Was that true? Pia blushed and nodded. And is it still true? Jaime asked, in a softer tone. Pia nodded again, the hue of her cheeks reddening till her blush became a flush. Well, Jaime said, now's your chance. If you truly desire me, you'll drop your dress, and stand before me completely bare, bereft of secrets. Pia averted her eyes as she lifted her hands and undid the lacing on her brown rosespun dress before lifting her hands to her shoulders and pushing the cloth away. The dress hung briefly from her breasts, and then her hips, but before long it lay in a pool on the floor, and Pia was naked. She was still a shapely girl with round breasts and wide hips and a pert ass, though a few of her curves had lessened with hunger, and much of her skin was still marred with splotchy, faded bruises. The worst victim of her captivity, however, seemed her cunt. It was a mess, all swollen and bruised, and looking at it Jaime doubted if it'd ever fully mend. Her ass will be worse, Jaime knew without looking. We all had her 100 times, Jaime remembered one of the men he'd been forced to behead had said after he'd been caught trying to rape her on the ride. 100 each, honest. Gregor's men had seemed genuinely surprised when Jaime let his blade fall on the man's neck. Yet the girl did not seem reserved, and instead eyed him with naked hunger, a desperation in her eyes that bordered on uncomfortable to be aware of. This was a dreadful idea, Jaime knew immediately, but he did not allow himself to be deterred. The girl was willing, and wanted him very much, and he knew he'd rather not suffer the guilt of denying her a second time, even if any desire he'd felt for her had already long since disappeared. On your knees, Pia, Jaime gently instructed her. The girl lowered herself to her knees without complaint and slowly crawled to him, nestling herself between his legs. She kissed his belt, and before long it was undone and his cock was buried deep in her toothless mouth. Again, Jaime felt disgusted, but now only at himself at what he'd become. She was so much smaller than him, so much younger. A little girl, that's all she is, Jaime suddenly thought. A little girl in a woman's body, scarred and scared. Yet Pia's tongue did not give his cock so much as a moment to wilt, and before long he had finished under the influence of her ministrations. She swirled his seed around her mouth and swallowed, before setting enthusiastically on his softening cock again, eagerly lapping up any stray drops as she committed herself to seeing it stiffen once more. Jaime placed a hand on her shoulder and gently pushed her away. Do I not please you, sir? Pia asked, lifting her hand to cover her mouth as she spoke. You please me plenty, Jaime said, not wanting to hurt the poor girl's feelings. But it seems I have other matters weighing on my mind. Gather your things and go. We ride for Riverrun at dawn. Mayhap there you can find a more vital man among the soldiers, someone more suitable than I. But I only desire you, sir, Pia assured him. I dream of you, all in white with your golden curls during Lord Went's tourney, ever so gallant and brave. Allow me to please you properly, sir, even if it's only ever for one night. That's all I ask. You'll forget all your troubles once I start, I swear it. Jaime grunted, unwilling to crush her hopes, and waved her away. Once she had dressed herself again and departed, Jaime turned to face the blade he'd set down on the bed. He pulled Oathkeeper from its sheath, observed the swirling pattern of gray and red, ashamed at himself as he recited his vows in his mind. If you want to read ahead of the public release, or just want to support me, you can join my Patreon. Patreon.com/Nolma.